Chapter 3520. Gongfan glanced at the mercenaries behind Jiyu Jinglian from the corner of his eye. He glanced sideways and signaled with his eyes. Lisa, who was behind him, immediately understood. Facing so many mercenaries from the Jiyu family, she walked calmly to the mercenary who had shot Gongfan's subordinate. She grabbed his throat and twisted it tightly with her knuckles. That mercenary couldn't help but smile mockingly. The person standing in front of him and strangling his throat was only a girl of about 10 years old. She had such a small figure, especially her hands, which were small and thin. Did she think that she could break his throat? What kind of joke was this? However, before a mocking laugh could come out of his throat, Lisa's fingertips were filled with strength. She suddenly released her grip and the mercenary's throat was broken. A crisp crack sound was heard. It was extremely crisp and clean. In the next second, the mercenary didn't even have time to resist. His body fell down and leaned against the wall weakly. He twitched violently and stopped moving. She killed without spilling blood. With just one hand, she ended the life of an adult mercenary. A little girl under Gongfan actually had such terrifying combat power. In an instant, everyone was even more vigilant. However, they saw Lisa return behind the youth. She lowered her eyes and the hostility on her face gradually faded. She was like a killing machine, ready to be ordered at any time. And the only master in her eyes was the silent youth sitting in his seat. Jiyu Jinglian narrowed his eyes slightly. However, he heard Gongfan's low voice slowly ring out. Jiyu Jinglian, you and I are both capitalists. Since we are capitalists, we will never do a business that is at a loss. In other words, you hurt my subordinate's life. Naturally, you have to use your subordinate's life in exchange. When Jiyu Jinglian heard this, he was slightly stunned. Then, his lips curled up into a smile. You are so young, but you are so arrogant. Such ruthless methods are really not simple. However, Gongfan sneered. You dare to go against me. You are not simple either. His arrogant tone didn't give in at all. The two of them sat opposite each other. Their auras clashed, but for a moment, it was hard to tell who was superior. Although the scene was deathly silent, the shadows of swords and sabers could be seen everywhere. Jiyu Jinglian was the first to break the silence. Since I dared to come here, I have some confidence. This hotel has long been surrounded by the Hurricane Group's people. I'm afraid it'll be difficult for me to leave. Gongfan remained silent. Jiyu Jinglian continued, Hurricane Group wants to buy the land in my hands for nothing more than to develop the Heavenly Eye project. If this land is used as a test site, with its unique electric energy field, it is indeed the best choice. However, I will not sign this agreement. Of course, I don't have to worry about you razing my factory to the ground. Gongfan raised his eyebrows but did not think much of it. Oh, how do you know? Jiyu Jinglian inched closer to him and gave him a devilish smile. He enunciated each word clearly. Because there are thousands of fuses buried under this ground. Once one is touched, it will instantly detonate the explosives buried underground. When that happens, it will be like dominoes. Everything within a radius of a few hundred miles will be devastated. After a pause, he said meaningfully, you can try blowing one up. Gongfan's usually cold and dead face finally revealed a slightly stunned expression. He didn't expect Jiyu Jinglian to be so generous as to bury so many explosives underground. Chapter 3521. Jiyu Jinglian said casually, even if you spend a lot of effort to rebuild it, this explosion will definitely destroy the electromagnetic field here. In that case, this piece of land will be completely destroyed. Even though this was not a big deal to the rich and powerful Hurricane, this was the only place in the entire world where the electromagnetic field was unique. Other than here, there is no other magnetic field station. Gongfan narrowed his dark eyes slightly, and his body overflowed with hostility. The air seemed to freeze because of this, and it was suffocating. How much explosives did you bury? Jiyu Jinglian smiled leisurely. It's enough to blow up an entire Atlanta island. Impossible. The power of explosives alone would never produce such a strong explosive force. It's impossible, but you seem to have neglected that other than explosives, there is abundant natural gas underground. A year ago, Jiyu Jinglian had already expected this. At that time, Hurricane had already set their eyes on this piece of land. After exploration, the rich natural gas and oil underground became the target of many capitalists. Therefore, he buried tons of explosives in advance. Explosives were not scary. What was scary was the natural gas. When it encountered explosives or open flames, there would be no life within a radius of hundreds of miles. In just a moment, the initiative of the situation had been overturned. Jiyu Jinglian had the absolute right to speak. In other words, it was either you don't covet this piece of land of mine, or you can openly snatch it or raze it to the ground. At worst, we'll die together. The Jiyu family would only lose a piece of land, but the Hurricane family would lose the only electromagnetic field station in the world. It had to be said that Jiyu Jinglian was very shrewd. He knew how to grasp the pros and cons. He hit the nail on the head and took the initiative from the passive side. When Gong Fan heard this, he was silent for a long time. Then, he suddenly curled his lips and let out a cold laugh. Rumor has it that the head of the Jiyu family is young but ruthless. Today, I have experienced it. Gong Fan paused, but his eyebrows were slightly furrowed. However, it is said that you have a 7-year-old son named Jiyu Changza. Before he finished speaking, Jiyu Jinglian's face suddenly froze. Other than that, you also have a wife named Chu Ho. However, Chu Ho's background was not as simple as the information stated. She should be the former Interpol's top anti-crime inspector. Who would have thought that she would be married to the capital's #1 heiress? How ironic. Jiyu Jinglian's eyes flashed with a cold light. Gong Fan observed his reaction seriously and immediately became interested. What? You seem to care a lot about them. Jiyu Jinglian did not say a word, but his eyes were cold and vigilant. Jiyu Jinglian, I'm surprised that someone of your status would get married and have a child. Jiyu Jinglian remained silent. Rumor has it that the head of the Jiyu clan is heartless and cold. Gong Fan leaned slightly against the back of the chair and said lightly, with your status, if you have a weakness, it will inevitably be a hindrance. Do you need me to get rid of them for you? Jiyu Jinglian immediately said coldly, how dare you? Gong Fan said casually, I'm just being kind. I don't want these 2 extra people to drag you down. With your status, if you have concerns, it means that you have a weakness. Such a weakness will definitely become a stumbling block for you. Chapter 35-22. After a pause, Gong Fan rested his chin on his hand lazily and enjoyed Jiyu Jinglian's livid expression. He said slowly, look, if I use your wife and son's lives to threaten you to sign this agreement, will you sign it or refuse to sign it? His tone seemed calm, but it was full of threat. Jiyu Jinglian glared at him. His hands on the table gradually clenched into fist. He clenched his fists tightly and revealed his sharpness. Behind Gong Fan, the sound of a gun being loaded gradually came. If he dared to make any moves, he would definitely be shot to death on the spot. You're threatening me. That depends on whether you're willing to accept my threat. Even if he had to fight to the death, Gong Fan was determined to take down this experimental base station. The success of the Deva I plan depended on whether this piece of land could be successfully acquired. Therefore, to Gong Fan, this agreement was no ordinary agreement. Jiyu Jinglian suddenly let out a cold laugh. Why should I believe you? If I sign this agreement, will you let my wife and son go? Compared to the Jiyu family, the Hurricane Group's methods were even more ruthless and unscrupulous. So what if he signed this agreement? Since Gong Fan had investigated Jiyu Changza and Chu Ho's information and even knew their movements, he could pose a threat to them at any time. Let's not talk about the distant, but the near. Now, even if he signed the agreement, he might not be able to leave alive. Before this negotiation, Jiyu Jinglian and Gong Fan each had a chance of winning. They were very conceited that they could win this battle. However, they each miscalculated. Gong Fan did not expect that Jiyu Jinglian would bury so many explosives under this piece of land. And Jiyu Jinglian did not expect that in such a short period of time, Gong Fan had already investigated Chu Ho and Jiyu Changza's identities and background. In the face of the powerful Hurricane Group, the Jiyu family's last bargaining chip was not very persuasive. Jiyu Jinglian slowly closed his eyes. It was lonely at the top. With his status, falling in love was tantamount to touching the door of death. Wandering in such a bloody storm, what one feared the most was having one's weakness grasped by others. This inch of weakness was enough to be fatal. Therefore, he had always maintained a distant relationship with women. Even though he had had women before, without exception, he had never fallen in love. He knew very well that if he were to fall in love with her, it would undoubtedly expose his Achilles heel. Despicable. Yes, I'm despicable. Gong Fan sneered. Could it be that this is the first time you've seen Hurricane's way of doing things? I've never claimed to be a gentleman. I'll do whatever it takes to achieve my goals. That's my style of doing things. His gaze fell on the agreement again and he said casually, "Sign it." "Don't worry, I don't like to shoot from the back. If you sign him, I'll let you leave North Africa safely." Jiyu Jinglian was so angry that he laughed and gritted his teeth. "Then how should I thank you?" He took the agreement and held the pen in his hand. Looking at the column of the agreement, he said, "Permanently cede the ownership of 500 mu of land in Mufelu." His eyes were almost overflowing with scarlet. "What? I can't accept it." Gong Fan raised his eyebrows casually. "Look, what an angry expression. But, I like it." Chapter 35-23. Lisa stood behind Gong Fan. Every word that came out of his mouth did not sound like something a person of flesh and blood would say. Even an emotionless killing machine like her felt a chill run down her spine when she heard these words. The bright and sunny yo-yo of the past seemed to have disappeared from this body forever. Now, the 9-year-old child in front of her, who was extremely mature, was more like a sick and paranoid devil. He used his admiring gaze to admire every loser who crawled at his feet. Ever since he became Gong Fan, his methods had become even more cold-blooded and emotionless. But for some reason, in the past, she despised Yo-Yo for being too soft-hearted. He always had that innocent and romantic look, pure and harmless. Instead, it made her feel that she was an out-and-out devil who killed people without batting an eyelid. But now, facing such a Gong Fan, she suddenly missed that bright smile. Every time she thought of it, she would feel warm. However, when she returned to reality, she knew very well that such a Yu would never come back to life. Lisa's face was filled with disappointment. After Jiyu Jinglian signed the agreement, when he pressed his thumbprint on the signature area, it meant that he had lost in this smokeless war. He had actually lost to this child. He was indignant, very indignant. He had lost completely. Ever since he became the head of the Jiyu family, no one had ever made him suffer a loss. He had always been a high-spirited man. However, under the influence of some unknown emotion, he actually signed this name as if he was possessed by gods and demons. He could have resisted signing it. But Gong Fan had used Jiyu Changze and Chu Ho to threaten him. He could not ignore it. Perhaps, as he had said, he did not know when he had developed a concern in his heart. This concern had become his most fatal weakness at the same time. After Jiyu Jinglian signed the agreement, someone came over to take it away and handed it to Gong Fan for him to look through. Outside the window, the evening wind suddenly blew, and the hat on his head fell. The cloak and hat fell off his shoulders, revealing the youth's delicate and handsome face. On his fair face, his eyes were cold, and the indifference between his eyebrows seemed to be covered with a layer of ice. The moment Jiyu Jinglian saw his face, he was slightly stunned. This face was extremely familiar. Yun Tianyu. He still remembered that when Shengyu Financial Group held a press conference, Mu Yaja, who was already the chairman of Shengyu, had gathered more than 100 media reporters and announced Yun Tianyu's identity on the spot. Jiyu Jinglian also happened to see this news. In the camera, Yun Tianyu stood beside Mu Yaja with an obedient smile on his face. He looked like a well-mannered little gentleman. However, the two children's faces. Yun Tianyu. Comms. How troublesome. The mercenaries behind Jiyu Jinglian immediately stepped forward and fired. In an instant, smoke filled the air. The row of mercenaries behind him were all shot and fell into a pool of blood, their hearts beating out of them. Gong Shaoying had ordered that anyone who had seen Gong Fan's face should not be allowed to live. Chapter 35-24. Seeing that none of his subordinates survived in less than half a minute, Jiyu Jinglian's face was filled with shock. Dark clouds and anger gathered between his brows. One of the mercenaries walked in front of Jiyu Jinglian and raised his wrist. The desert eagle in his hand was aimed at Jiyu Jinglian's temple. He turned his head to look at Gong Fan. As long as he gave the order, he would immediately pull the trigger. "Master, how should we deal with this person?" Gong Fan raised his eyes coldly and said expressionlessly, "I said before, let him leave safely." When the mercenary heard this, he immediately put away the desert eagle and returned behind Gong Fan. Gong Fan said, "Let's go." Jiyu Jinglian was extremely surprised. He actually let him go and let him leave. Jiyu Jinglian pursed his lips and looked at him with disdain. "Don't play this trick. Don't tell me that if I turn around, someone will point a gun at me." Gong Fan said calmly, "No one will shoot." Jiyu Jinglian was speechless. "I will do what I say. This is also one of the principles of a capitalist." Jiyu Jinglian raised his eyebrows and suddenly stood up. He said word by word, "You said it." After saying that, he suddenly turned around and walked towards the door. Behind him, one of the mercenaries saw that Gong Fan really let Jiyu Jinglian go. He gritted his teeth and reached for his waist belt. He gripped his gun tightly and suddenly pulled it out and loaded it. The cold muzzle of the gun was aimed straight at Jiyu Jinglian's back. His finger was on the trigger, ready to fire at any moment. Bang! A loud sound was heard. A gunshot exploded behind him. Jiyu Jinglian paused in his steps and looked sideways. From the corner of his eye, he saw that the mercenary who was waiting for an opportunity to sneak an attack had been shot and fell to the ground. He held his wrist that was shot and widened his eyes in disbelief as he looked at Gong Fan. "Master, if you let the tiger return to the mountain, it will definitely become a threat in the future." Gong Fan leaned lazily against the back of the chair. His fingertips tapped on the table casually, and his expression was obviously a little impatient. "I don't need you to teach me what to do. His Jiyu Jinglian, and the Jiyu family is a big business. If he's allowed to leave North Africa, the consequences will be unimaginable." "Shut up," Gong Fan said coldly. "If you continue talking nonsense, you can go and die." The mercenary was so shocked that he shut his mouth, not daring to say anything else. Jiyu Jinglian left without looking back. Gong Fan slowly stood up, put on his hat, and walked towards the door. Lisa immediately followed. In the car, the two of them sat in silence. Lisa turned to look at the side of Gong Fan's face and clenched her fists tightly. When she thought of his cold words and actions at the negotiation table earlier, she hesitated for a moment. She suddenly tried to say a name. Yun Shisha. Gong Fan's expression did not change at all. He turned around and frowned slightly. It was obvious that he felt unfamiliar and puzzled by the name that came out of her mouth. "What? Master, do you still remember this name?" Yun Shisha. Gong Fan frowned and pondered for a moment. Then he asked coldly, "Should I remember this name?" Lisa was stunned. For a moment, she did not know how to respond. Gong Fan asked again, "Who is she?" "She is." Lisa hesitated. When she saw that Gong Fan had really forgotten any memory of Yun Shisha, for some reason, her heart ached. Gong Fan said coldly, "If it's a meaningless person, I naturally won't have any impression of her." After saying that, he looked out of the window again. Chapter 35-25. At the Jiyu residence. Chu Ho was lying flat on the bed with her arms under her head. She looked at the night sky outside the window, her thoughts in a mess. For some reason, her eyelids were twitching violently. After Jiyu Jinglian left, she had insomnia for 2 nights. She would toss and turn in bed until the wee hours of the morning before she could fall asleep. When she woke up the next day, she would go to work early and return home exhausted. At night, she would have insomnia for no reason. It was the same for 2 consecutive days, and she was exhausted. For some reason, she had an ominous feeling in her heart. Jiyu Jinglian went to North Africa. The next day, the news reported that the war in North Africa was gradually expanding, and the peacekeeping forces were about to intervene. Ever since the war started, North Africa had been divided into 3 regions. One was the war zone, one was the neutral zone, and the last was the peaceful zone. However, the war had already spread to the neutral zone, and several of the GU family's major factories were built in the neutral zone. If the war spread, it would affect the GU family's businesses. It was said that several airports in North Africa would be bombed into ruins. All air routes would be stopped, and international traffic would be paralyzed. This meant that many people would not be able to leave North Africa by plane. If they could not leave in time, they would become sacrifices for the war. This war had caused heavy civilian casualties, and various countries had begun to evacuate their nationals. Many people from developed countries had left early. China had also begun to evacuate its nationals on a large scale. Many of the Chinese factories in North Africa were now empty, leaving behind empty factories. The Chinese gathered at the country's embassy, waiting for orders to evacuate their nationals. The ship in charge of evacuating the nationals had already rushed to several major ports in North Africa. It was estimated that the evacuation would be completed within 3 days. Then, what about Jiyu Jinglian? If he continued to stay in North Africa, he would be in danger. She had to admit that this was a very strong man. Even the most powerful mercenaries were no match for him. However, it was the era of firearms. No matter how strong one's body was, it would be difficult to withstand cannons and bullets. Chu Ho asked Uncle Fu about Jiyu Jinglian, but Uncle Fu replied that communications were cut off and they could not contact the person in charge of the factory. There was no news. This meant that Jiyu Jinglian's life was in danger. Chu Ho did not feel good about it. She didn't know why. She clearly hated this man, but at this juncture, she was actually worried about him. Chu Ho turned over and hugged the pillow in his arms. He closed his eyes and forced himself not to let his imagination run wild. The door was suddenly pushed open. Butler Fu rushed in with a panicked expression and said in a panic, "Chu He, something's wrong." Chu Ho suddenly sat up from the bed in shock and stared at him in a daze. When he met Uncle Fu's panicked gaze, the uneasiness in his heart suddenly expanded to its maximum. "What? I've received news that the GU family's business in North Africa has been taken over by Hurricane. All the employees who stayed behind in the factory have been expelled. He even said that the mercenaries who followed Master are all gone." "It's gone?" "Yes," Uncle Fu nodded, his voice trembling. "I heard that Master signed an agreement. When the negotiation ended, the dozens of mercenaries he brought with him were all shot dead on the spot." Chu He was dumbfounded by his words. Chapter 35-26. Why did he sign that agreement? Chu Ho was a little confused. Jiyu Jinglian mentioned this to me. He said that he would not give up this business to Hurricane no matter what. Why did he sign the agreement? Uncle Fu's face twitched violently. He clenched his fists and said with some difficulty, "My men told me that Hurricane is using Xiao Bao and you as a hostage. If you don't sign the agreement, I'm afraid that it will be disadvantageous to you. Old Master might be worried about you, so." When Chu Ho heard this, he was stunned. The corners of his lips twitched, but he still didn't believe it. "That's impossible. Jiyu Jinglian is such an arrogant person. How could he give up such a big business for Xiao Bao and me?" Uncle Fu sighed and said, "Chu Ho, you might not be able to do it, but the onlooker sees more clearly. In Old Master's eyes, you are different from others. Maybe you think that Old Master is arrogant, but from what I see, ever since Xiao Bao came to the GU family, Old Master has changed a lot." Chu Ho was speechless for a moment. Even though Old Master might not be like other fathers, and he might not be as gentle or patient, but he cares a lot about anything that threatens Xiao Bao. Old Master is not good with words, but that doesn't mean that I'm not a good father. Uncle Fu continued, "Old Master cares a lot about Xiao Bao. That was why he forced you to sign that agreement and threatened you to give up Xiao Bao's custody. If you were determined not to sign it, Old Master could have forced you to give in. However, he took into consideration the feelings between you and Xiao Bao, so he allowed you to stay in the GU family. He even got a marriage certificate with you. Maybe it's hard for you to believe that a man like Old Master would fall in love with any woman, but from what I see, he really treats you differently. Maybe you are really special to him. With Old Master's temperament, He was destined not to be like other people, falling in love to the point of death. However, a person like him would never allow anyone to threaten his family. Chu-Ho's lips suddenly trembled. She suddenly stood up, but her expression was surprisingly calm. Uncle Fu, were all the airports in North Africa destroyed? Are you going to North Africa to find him? Answer my question first. Uncle Fu was stunned. He immediately nodded and said, yes. Then, how can we get to North Africa? You can use a freighter, Uncle Fu said. The Jiyu family has a batch of firearms that are about to be shipped to North Africa, but it's a single flight. There's no return flight. Solo flight? Yes, it's very difficult to enter and leave North Africa now. The situation is tense. This cargo ship was sent by the North African military, so it's only a single route. When are we leaving? Uncle Fu finally couldn't take it anymore. Chu-Ho, don't take the risk. Tonight or tomorrow night? Today. Today, tonight. Chu-Ho raised her eyebrows in understanding and said, help me pack my luggage. I'm leaving tonight. Uncle Fu was shocked. Are you crazy? It's too risky for you to go to North Africa now. Chu-Ho said firmly, I want to bring him back. No. It's too risky. Chu-Ho, don't be too rash. Chapter 35-27. Uncle Fu wanted to say something, but Chu-Ho suddenly turned around and grabbed him by the collar. She said word by word, Uncle Fu, let me tell you. Although I may not be Jiyu Jinglian's match in terms of fighting skills, I've been through a lot. But in terms of experience, I once crossed the battlefront alone and safely brought a hostage out of the center of the war. I was also chased by the enemy when I was on a mission. I was seriously injured, but I still managed to pass through the rainforest. Before I joined Interpol, I also joined the peacekeeping force. I'm very familiar with the terrain of North Africa. Jiyu Jinglian can't compare to this experience. Uncle Fu was so frightened by her hostility that he didn't say a word. Chu-Ho stared at him and suddenly laughed coldly. Why? Do you think I want to take this risk? If Jiyu Jinglian dies in North Africa, it has nothing to do with me, but his Xiaobao's father. I can't sit back and do nothing when there's no news of him. How are you going to find him? Uncle Fu said, North Africa is so big, and there's war everywhere. How are you going to find him? And how are you going to bring him back? North Africa is very big, but you said that Jiyu Jinglian is in neutral territory. Then, at least the range is locked in. If war breaks out, then other than the asylum station, the embassy, and the Prime Minister's residence, we can eliminate them one by one. Then we can locate his location. Uncle Fu was confused, but hearing her solemn vow, he thought that she probably had the confidence to bring Jiyu Jinglian back safe and sound. So, he nodded reluctantly. If you don't have full confidence, don't take the risk. Too bad. I'm just a bag of old bones. I can't help much. Chu-Ho curled her lips into a smile and appeared relaxed. You stay here and take good care of Xiaobao. Okay, I'll take good care of Xiaobao. You said that Hurricane Group used Xiaobao and me as a threat to force Jiyu Jinglian to sign the agreement. After squatting for a while, Chu-Ho said, to ensure Xiaobao's safety, don't go to school for the time being. Ask for leave from the kindergarten. All right. Uncle Fu helped her pack and walked to Xiaobao's room. In Xiaobao's room, Chu-Ho quietly walked to the bedside and bent over slightly. Looking at the sleeping child, he frowned slightly. He was reluctant to part with him. Chu-Ho gently caressed his forehead, closed his eyes, and planted a kiss between his eyebrows. Good night, Xiaobao. She hoped that the next time she said good night, it would be with Jiyu Jinglian. She swore to herself that she would bring Jiyu Jinglian back for the sake of Xiaobao. The cargo ship that was scheduled to depart at 3 in the morning set off an hour earlier. Chu-Ho caught up with the cargo ship in advance. Carrying a huge battlefield bag, she boarded the ship to North Africa. This cargo ship would take about 4 days and 4 nights to reach North Africa. However, this was almost the fastest way of transportation at the moment. The route was disrupted. It was said that in the war, all the railway tracks were blown to pieces by the rebels. The airport, cargo, and all other transportation were in a state of paralysis. Even if it took 4 days and 4 nights, it was the most optimistic speed. If it was slow, It might not even reach the neutral zone in North Africa in a week. To reach the port, they still had to pass through the flames of war and advance into the neutral zone. Chapter 35-29. Chu Ho was confident because she was already familiar with the terrain of North Africa. Even if the entire area was bombed to ashes, she could still recognize it from memory. When she was still in the peacekeeping force, she had gone deep into the battlefield and was responsible for patrolling the neutral and peaceful areas. At that time, the flames of war had already begun. However, in the blink of an eye, many years had passed, and the war still showed no signs of stopping. Even though the ceasefire agreement was signed 3 years ago, it had only been a year since the ceasefire, and local wars were still reignited. Now, it had become an international war. She could not help but suspect that Hurricane Group was fanning the flames. Hurricane Group had the ability to control the situation. Although the ceasefire was due to the intervention of the Shi forces, the anti-government forces had never given up on the idea of starting a war. However, the various countries controlled the military and took drastic measures to prevent the flames of war from spreading. Hurricane Group sold weapons secretly at low prices to the military and started the war again. Because of the weapons blockade and the anti-war prohibition agreement, the sales of any weapons to North Africa were strictly prohibited. Hurricane Group sold weapons of mass destruction to the Zhengfu army and sold some to the anti-government forces at low prices. Just like that, the two sides started fighting again. Hurricane Group had always been on Interpol's top blacklist. Gong Xiaoying and Gong Jie had always been at the top of the blacklist. However, with Hurricane Group's great influence and stable position, Interpol did not even have the ability to interfere. Hurricane Group was too powerful and had always been regarded as a thorn in the side of the various countries. However, no one could defeat it. The cargo ship sailed on the sea. Chu Ho stayed in the cabin. Outside the window, there were black men walking around. These were the Zhengfu army, responsible for escorting weapons. Part of North Africa used to be civilian land, so the official language was English. Chu Ho's English was first class. However, it was a special period now, so it was better not to walk around the cabin so as to avoid causing trouble. The journey at sea was especially slow. Every day was very torturous. After a short period of adaptation, Chu Ho overcame many obstacles. At first, she was not used to it. In addition, the food on the ship was difficult to describe in words. It was either potatoes or bread. It was extremely disgusting. However, no matter how disgusting it was, she had to swallow it. 5 days later, the ship finally arrived safely at the port. The port was located in the peace zone. When she landed, she heard that parts of the neutral zone had already fallen. There were countless casualties, and many areas had been occupied by anti-government forces. Hence, most of the Zhengfu army had already retreated from the neutral zone. As for the rest, most of them had probably been captured. War was especially cruel. A precious life in a war was no different from a bullet. In war, humanity was obliterated incisively and vividly. Soldiers, civilians, and even children who did not know the ways of the world, without exception, could not survive. She watched helplessly as a child was run over by a tank and was badly mutilated. She saw with her own eyes a soldier holding an AK gun and shooting at a helpless civilian. Their intestines and stomachs were torn apart. She also saw all kinds of corpses lying messily on the ground on the streets and in the wasteland. They were as lowly as ants. That was why she hated war. Abhorrence. Chapter 35-30. Chu Ho hired a driver from the front line for $100, some food and water, and successfully bribed him. Because of the outbreak of war, his family had lost their source of food. They even resorted to eating tree bark and soil to survive. Before the driver sent her to the front line, he went home and gave all the food to his wife and daughter. Then, he drove her to the front line. Along the way, the driver was curious why she wanted to go to the front line with such a big bag. At this time, even the Zhengfu army, including many unavoidably, could only think of ways to escape from the war zone. He found it strange to meet someone who wanted to go to the front line, so he asked curiously in broken English, "Are you a war correspondent?" "No." "Then why do you want to go to the front line?" "It's raining bullets there." There are anti-government troops and corpses everywhere. It's hell. The driver smiled and said, but I already sent 2 batches of war correspondents to the front line this morning. In the end, one of the correspondents was shot as soon as he got out of the car. I dragged him back. Luckily, he survived. When did the war break out? The driver sighed and said helplessly, a few days ago. Logically speaking, the neutral zone shouldn't have fallen. But because of the war between the two sides, the situation expanded. Coupled with the intervention of other countries, the neutral zone was about to fall. Now, has the neutral zone fallen? What about the personnel from the other countries? They've all evacuated. Do you know about the military factory in Worth? Worth? You're going to Worth? Yes. Worther has been shut down. All the factory workers have been dismissed. Many of the employees are locals. Those who can evacuate have already evacuated. Those who didn't manage to evacuate in time are trapped there. Chu-ho was speechless. She planned to go to Worth first, which was the Jiyu family's military factory. Then, she would follow the factory and search from other routes. Uncle Fu was also trying to contact Jiyu Jinglian. Although they had lost contact, they might be able to locate him. It started to rain heavily. From Tripoli to Sirte, it took more than 4 hours to drive along the coast. The road was muddy and overgrown with weeds. It was very difficult to walk. In the evening, the heavy rain made the road even more bumpy. In addition, there were no street lights, so it was pitch black ahead. One of the car's high-beam headlights was also broken, so it was difficult to illuminate the road ahead. The chauffeur suggested, "Why don't we make do for the night and leave when the sun rises?" "Are you tired?" "I'm not tired. At night, you won't be able to see the road ahead clearly. You might encounter an ambush. It's very dangerous." Chu-ho nodded in tacit agreement. On the way, they came across a rundown hotel. Chu-ho carried his bag and entered the hotel with the driver. When the owner saw the door being pushed open, he instinctively hid behind the counter, trembling in fear. In the past few days, there had been no end to the war. Many soldiers had come to rob the place. Because of this, everyone was on high alert. The driver quickly said, "We're not soldiers, they're civilians." The owner heaved a sigh of relief and said, "The hotel is closed. We have to pack up and leave tomorrow morning. This place is full of anti-government troops. How dare you come here?" Chapter 35-31. When the boss saw the money, he nodded and gave them the keys. Chu-ho and the driver were in 2 rooms. The hotel there was cheap, but the environment was quite bad. When she opened the door, she saw the dilapidated facilities. There were bullet holes on the wall from submachine gun shots. It was a scene of devastation. She locked the door from the inside and walked into the room. A foul smell assailed her nostrils. There was a musty smell on the bed. Chu-ho sniffed it. It was not hard to tell that it was a mixture of blood and sweat that had accumulated over a long period of time. There were no windows in the room and it was airtight. Hence, the musty smell was very strong. The bathroom was dirty and messy. However, it was better than sleeping outside. Chu-ho threw her bag on the bed and leaned against it. She hugged her chest and closed her eyes. In the middle of the night, there was a sudden movement at the door. She was always alert and immediately noticed the strange movements at the door. The lights were on in the room. She opened one eye gently and saw that the door was pushed open. 2 heads were moving around outside the door as if they were checking out the situation in the room. Chu-ho did not make a sound and pretended to be asleep. When the 2 people saw that she was asleep, they crept into the room quietly. When the 2 of them were exposed to the light, Chu-ho recognized them immediately. They were the driver and the boss. The 2 of them were communicating in the local dialect in a low voice. They knew that Chu-ho could understand English, so they communicated in the local dialect. However, they probably did not expect that Chu-ho, who often traveled in and out of North Africa, had a rough grasp of the local language. "This woman seems to be very rich. Do you see that bag?" It was the driver's voice. "I see a lot of food, water, and a lot of cash in the bag. How much is there?" "There must be tens of thousands of US dollars. "Oh my God," the boss gasped. "That's a big piece of meat. Chu-ho suddenly understood that the driver and the boss knew each other. Perhaps they were in cahoots. She went through the whole process. When they arrived, the driver took the initiative to ask to stay at a hotel for the night. As luck would have it, he ended up in this hotel. Many civilians in North Africa were very poor. Because of the war, they did not have fresh food reserves. Therefore, violent incidents of robbing Chinese shops were endless. The driver probably saw that she had money and a lot of food on her, so he had evil intentions. Chu-ho remained motionless. They did not realize that she was actually awake and thought that she was sleeping soundly. Therefore, they crept closer to the bed and saw that she was using her bag as a pillow. If he wanted to take her bag, he would definitely wake her up. The two of them exchanged glances. The driver signaled with his eyes and reminded them, "Kill her." The boss nodded and cocked his gun. However, his peripheral vision inadvertently fell on Chu-ho's face. He was shocked to find that her eyes had suddenly opened. Before he could let out a coherent cry of surprise, Chu-ho suddenly jumped up from the bed and clamped his legs around his neck. With a scissor kick, he flipped him onto the ground. When the driver saw this, he reached out to snatch her bag. Chu-ho sensed the movement behind her. She glanced at him coldly from the corner of her eye and gave him a roundhouse kick. The swift and fierce kick sent him to the ground. Chapter 35-32. The boss quickly picked up the gun and loaded it. He aimed the muzzle at her back and was about to pull the trigger. However, just as she pulled the trigger, Chu-he had already heard the sound of a gun being loaded behind her. With a sudden somersault, she dodged the bullet before he could shoot. Before the person could react, she bounced up from the ground, jumped over the big bed, and kicked her wrist, sending the gun flying away. With a backhand, Chu-he locked his arms behind his back. Looking around, she could not find any cloth strips, so she simply broke his wrist bones with two cracking sound. The boss cried out in pain and wailed. The pain of having his bones dislocated caused his body to twitch violently. Chu-ho ignored his screams. She reached out to grab his jaw and dislocated it. She threw him aside and walked toward the driver. A minute later, the driver's joints were also dislocated and he was thrown beside the boss. Chu-ho walked in front of the two men and gently rubbed her wrists. She said coldly, "Who are you? Why did you attack me?" We, robbery?" Chu-ho narrowed her eyes dangerously. "Don't tell me you want to destroy the evidence." The two of them were so frightened by her terrifying gaze that they immediately fell silent, not daring to say another word. Chu-ho couldn't be bothered with them. She squatted down. However, this action scared the driver so much that he screamed. It was as if he was worried that she would kill them at any moment. "Don't worry, I won't kill you." Chu-ho fumbled for the car keys from the driver's body. Then she stood up, picked up her combat bag, and turned to leave. The two men were left looking at each other with cold sweat all over their bodies. Chu-ho walked out of the hotel and parked the car at the entrance. In the rain, she could vaguely see the flames in the distance. That was probably the neutral zone that had fallen. She turned on the compass and got into the car. She threw her bag on the front passenger seat and got into the driver's seat. She started the car and drove slowly in the direction of the flames. In the rain, the air was humid. Chu-ho took out a bottle of water from his bag and drank it in one gulp. He opened the window and casually threw the empty bottle out. At night, coupled with the heavy rain, visibility was very low, so she drove very slowly. They were surrounded by low hills and sparse weeds, but there was not a single person in sight. Along the way, she encountered one or two corpses lying in the middle of the road. For safety reasons, she was not sure if there was a ditch or a landslide on the side of the road. Therefore, for safety reasons, she did not go around the corpses and directly ran over them. After driving for tens of kilometers, they saw a checkpoint. There were many vehicles parked at the checkpoint, as well as a very large oil tanker. They could vaguely see a few livestock. Because of the outbreak of war, many gas stations were destroyed. Therefore, the checkpoint became an important supply station. The oil price here was very cheap because the oil resources were very rich. A liter of oil that cost 6 yuan in China only cost 60 yuan here. Even a few loaves of bread could be exchanged for a tank of oil. Oil was cheap here, But food, fruits, and fresh water were extremely expensive. Especially at a time like this, an apple was priceless. Chapter 35-33. The car drove all the way to the neutral zone. There were a total of 5 countries in North Africa. However, the neutral zone in the center was Bilibid. It was also the most prosperous area in North Africa. This place was away from the Sahara Desert and was the golden zone of North Africa. Therefore, it relied on oil and many mineral resources and was very developed. Throughout history, North Africa had always been protected by famine and plague. At the same time, there was also invasion and smoke. The car finally arrived at the border of Bilibid. After passing a few checkpoints, they were all passed by using food and US dollars. When they entered Bilibid, the intensity of the war was even more visible. The originally bustling street was now quiet and empty. On the side of the street, there were messy piles of items and corpses. Just more than 10 hours ago, the war had affected the central area. On the road, her car was stopped many times. Once, it was directly stopped by the rebel army. Chu Ho saw that they had tanks and missiles, so she obediently stopped and allowed them to check. Chu Ho got out of the car and first showed her China passport. Now that the country was strong, with this passport, it became a foolproof pass. As long as she showed her passport, she would not be troubled. Then, Chu Ho stepped aside and let them check the car. However, there were only some daily necessities in the bag and nothing else was found. When she entered the territory, she threw away the pistol in advance because she knew that if she encountered the rebel army, they would stop the car and search it. If they found the pistol, it would be disadvantageous to her. As for the food and cash, Chu Ho would not let them search, so she hid them in other corners of the car in advance. Perhaps it was because of racial advantage, most of the people in Bilibid were black. With the suppression of intelligence, they were obviously very stupid. Therefore, they did not find any food, so they let her go. It was not that Chu Ho looked down on them. The intelligence of these soldiers could make her cry. When she arrived in Bilibid, it was already dawn. She found an international hotel and made do for the day. After resting for a few hours, she continued to advance toward the center of the war. The war spread to Bilibid, and many cities in Bilibid fell. The Worth factory was one of the few cities that fell. Worth was in Jamal, Bilibid, which was dozens of kilometers away from the capital of Bilibid. She rested well, filled up her fuel tank, and set off again until she reached the border of Jamal city. As night fell, she bypassed the checkpoint and entered the city through another gap. She was quite familiar with the terrain here, so she avoided many war zones along the way and avoided many unnecessary troubles. After entering Jamal, the entire city was shrouded in the shadow of death. Smoke filled the air as the flames of war swirled in the air. Even at night, Chu could still see many refugees hugging their dead or injured relatives and crying in despair as she walked along the streets. Blood flowed like a river on the road. One could imagine how intense the battle was during the day. Hell on earth, city of despair. The embassy was located in the city center of Jamal, right next to the government building. Chu Ho relied on his memory to refer to the road signs and found the government building. However, he was shocked to see that the government building had been bombarded until it was on the verge of collapse. On the wall, there was a huge hole, mottled with blood, and the glass door had been bombed into pieces. There were countless casualties at the door, and there were piles of corpses that had not been cleaned up in time. Chapter 35-34. Even in the midst of war, in the fallen North Africa, whether it was the government or the rebel army, no one dared to touch the embassy. It was originally a local war. If the embassy was invaded, it would undoubtedly mean that the war had escalated to an international level. Chu Ho parked the car at the door, pushed the door open, and walked in. In the darkness, just as she pushed the door open, her combat boots stepped on a soft corpse. Then, in the pitch-black silence, she vaguely heard the sound of a gun being loaded. She immediately raised her hands calmly and said loudly in English, "I'm Chinese. I'm not carrying any weapons." A beam of high beam shone toward her. The strong light fell on her face and blinded her. Chu Ho calmly accepted the inspection until it was confirmed that she was a real Chinese. Finally, a light in the hall was turned on. Under the light, Chu Ho saw that countless Chinese had gathered together and were curled up in a corner, staring at her in fear. Chu Ho was shocked. She did not expect that there were still so many Chinese who had not evacuated. Why are you still here? Because the evacuation fleet has already evacuated. The next batch will only arrive in 3 days. The people in the embassy have all evacuated. We're all here waiting for rescue. Yeah, we don't dare to go out because the embassy is our last refuge. If we go out, those bullets have no eyes. It's very dangerous. It turned out that there were still many Chinese factory employees who did not manage to evacuate in time. Therefore, many people rushed into the embassy. Amidst the flames of war, the current embassy was like a refuge, as well as the last protective harbor. Although those people did not dare to invade the embassy, there were often some crazy rebels who did not care about the identity of the Chinese. They burned, killed, and robbed the stores and supermarkets opened by the Chinese. They even went to the embassy and robbed the food and water. Although it would not hurt their lives, the next batch of rescue fleet would only arrive at the port in 3 days. In other words, they had to hold on for more than 4 days. There were a lot of people, hundreds of people. Food and water were very limited. They had handed over all the cash they had. However, they could not afford food and water. Otherwise, with so many people, they could not last 4 days. Therefore, even if they were in the embassy, they did not dare to turn on the lights. They were worried that the rebels would see the light source and rush in to rob them. This place had already been robbed once and a few people were injured. Therefore, they did not dare to turn on the lights. Chu Ho heard that, frowned and asked, in other words, the country will send another ship to take care of your evacuation? Yes. Then, Chu Ho took a step forward and asked, are there any of worthless men here? After a long time, a man in orange uniform stood up slowly and asked in surprise, you're looking for worthless men? Yes. Chapter 35:35. After he said this, the others were obviously trembling in fear. When Chu Ho heard this, he frowned. He had an ominous feeling in his heart. If Werther was controlled by the people of Hurricane, then what about Jiyu Jinglian? She scanned the crowd but did not find him. Such an eye-catching man, even if he was thrown into the crowd, he would be found at a glance. Even if she did not find him, he would stand up and show himself when he saw her. But she did not see him. This meant that he was not here. Chu Ho asked again, you said that all of Werther's employees are here? The man hurriedly explained, no, only 2/3 of them are here. The other 1/3, more than 100, are trapped in the war zone. When they left Werther, the rebel army had already taken over the entire villa. That area has been sealed off by the rebel army. It's the center of the war. I'm going to find someone now. Chu Ho said again, his name is Jiyu Jinglian. Where is he now? Is he also trapped in the war zone? Everyone was shocked and looked at each other. The man asked in surprise, Jiyu Jinglian, isn't that our boss? Yes, CEO Jiyu, why are you looking for our boss? Chu Ho said, he's my husband. I heard that North Africa has fallen, so I came here to look for him. Chu Ho stood up straight and looked around. He said calmly, I need someone who is familiar with the terrain of Jamal to take me to the war zone to look for someone. Is anyone willing to come with me? Don't go. The man immediately said, Miss, I don't know if what you said is true. At least, I've never heard of our boss having a wife. The problem is that the war zone is now full of rebel soldiers. The streets are full of corpses and soldiers. If you go there rashly, you're not looking for someone, you're looking for death. Moreover, all of Werther's people who can come out have already come out. The rest are trapped in the middle of the war. I'm afraid their lives are uncertain. The hope of survival is very slim. If you go now, you'll be wasting your life. My man is not so weak. Your man won't die so easily. Chu Ho, on the other hand, was very confident in Jiyu Jinglian. Now, there was no news. That was enough to prove that he was still alive. As long as she was alive, she had a reason to take risk. No one dares to go with you. The man had a timid expression on his face as he trembled and said, those rebels are too cruel. No matter who they saw, Caucasian, Chinese, or civilian, they killed them all. What did that mean? If they went there now, they would die. It wasn't easy for us to escape from Worth. We won't risk our lives again. Chuhi did not force him to make his stance clear and resolute. After all, being afraid of death seemed to be a human instinct. After experiencing despair, the desire to survive grew stronger. All right, I'll go by myself. Chu Ho had just turned around when a young man's calm voice came from behind him. I'll go with you. Chapter 35-36. He spoke fluent Chinese and walked up to her. I grew up in Jamal, so I'm very familiar with the place. I'll go with you. Chu Ho was a little surprised. She looked behind him and asked, Where are your parents? He said that he wanted to go. Perhaps he was naive, but wouldn't his parents stop him? The young man's eyes darkened, and his voice weakened. My parents are already dead. Chu Ho was stunned. The young man pursed his lips, but he didn't cry. He gritted his teeth and said, They were killed by the rebels. Chu Ho smiled. Aren't you afraid? The young man shook his head and said firmly, I'm not afraid. Anyway, my father is gone, my mother is gone, and my sister. He gritted his teeth and closed his eyes. They're gone too. I'm alone. There's nothing to be afraid of. Chu Ho seemed to see herself when she was young. In the war, her family was destroyed, and her heart was filled with hatred and helplessness. She smiled and held out her hand to him. You're so brave. Okay, come with me, but I'll protect you. The young man nodded, held her hand, and followed her out of the embassy, leaving the crowd looking at each other. When Chu Ho left the embassy, she was very cautious. She looked around and made sure that there was no one around before she opened the car door and told the young man to get in and fasten his seatbelt. She quickly got into the car, started the car, and drove in the direction of Wortha. There's no one in Wortha now. My father is a worker in Wyatt. A few days ago, Wyatt was occupied by a large group of armed men. According to the other uncles, they're from the Hurricane Group, not the rebel army. However, they seem to be very powerful. So many Chinese factories were smashed and robbed by the rebel army, but Wyatt was the only one left unscathed. Hurricane. Chu Ho narrowed her eyes. Uncle Fu said that Hurricane Group used her and Xiao Bao to threaten Jiyu Jinglian to sign the agreement. He had to give up Wortha and that piece of land. The losses were heavy. She still couldn't figure out why Jiyu Jinglian did that. Was it because of her? Was he protecting her? Thinking of this possibility, Chu Ho suddenly laughed at himself. How could this be? This man had always been arrogant and self-righteous. How could he give up such a huge benefit just to protect her? The young man continued, It's very dangerous to drive to Wortha now. However, from what I know, there are many China factories in the war zone. Those factories are all state-owned enterprises, so the rebels don't dare to touch them. Some people might be hiding there. Where do we go? The young man pointed at the road sign in front of them. Go to that junction and head south. You are really familiar with the terrain. The young man nodded. I grew up here. Then how do you speak Chinese so well? That's because my parents are both from China, and I'm also from China. Of course, I have to speak Chinese, but I also know a little English. If my parents were still alive, with our passports, we would be able to catch up with the first batch of evacuation ships. At this point, the youth fell silent again. She probably thought of something sad again. His parents were shot to death because they were trying to protect him. Those damned rebels. They deserved to die for being so cruel and merciless. Chu Ho patted her head and smiled. Don't be sad. It's all in the past. Chapter 35-37. By the way, what's your name? My name is Yi Lin Shi. Lin Shi. That's a nice name. When they reached the intersection, Lin Shi suddenly said, Let's take the small path. I know a shortcut. Needless to say, Chu Ho did not dare to drive the car on the main street. She knew that there must be a lot of troops stationed there. Therefore, she followed Lin Shi's directions and drove to the small path. The so-called small path was extremely bumpy and difficult to walk on. The small path in the forest was a muddy path cultivated by the local people. It was not the road paved with cement. With this opening, it was dawn again. Chu Ho did not dare to rest. Although it was dangerous to drive when tired, this was the wild forest. There were wild beasts everywhere. Jackals, lions, cheetahs. It was very dangerous. She drove all the way to the factory that she had pointed out. After getting out of the car, she looked around and confirmed that there was no danger before letting she get out of the car. At the entrance of the factory, there was no one. There was no sign of life at all. Chu-ho took out the pistol from her waist belt and loaded it. She looked around vigilantly. Her left hand held she's hand tightly until they walked into the factory. She pushed the door open. Under the moonlight, it was full of dust. She waved his hand and coughed a few times. Chu-ho quickly covered his mouth and shushed him. Don't make a sound. She nodded and obediently shut his mouth. He did not make a sound. Chu-ho pushed the door open and walked in. She took out the night vision goggles from her bag and put them on. With this, she could clearly see the terrain even in the dark. Suddenly, two figures appeared in her line of sight. They were hiding behind the wall. They were local black people with guns in their hands. Although they were black, it was difficult to recognize them in the dark. However, Chu-ho's night vision goggles had thermal imaging. Therefore, she saw them at a glance. She immediately stopped in her tracks and said in the local language, "We are not rebels." The black people did not expect her to notice them. They looked at each other but were still vigilant. They tightened their grip on the guns in their hands. Chu-ho did not move forward. Instead, she took half a step back and put away her pistol. She slowly raised her hands to show her sincerity. "Don't worry. You are very safe. I won't hurt you." Only then did the few black civilians let down their guard and turn on a lamp. Under the light, Chu-hee was surprised to find that all the factory employees and civilians who had run over to hide were hiding on the second floor. They looked down nervously. When they saw that it was a woman and a child who came without any armed forces, they let down their guard. "Who are you?" "My husband is." Chu-hee asked again, "Are there any Wyatt's?" "Is CEO." The man became even more suspicious. "Why haven't I heard that President Ji-yu has a wife? We just got married not long ago." Chu-ho saw that he did not believe her, so she provided a few more private information about the Ji-yu family and the Ji-yu Corporation. Finally, the man believed her, but he looked very guilty. Chapter 35-38. It turned out that after Hurricane took over Wyatt, all the higher-ups of Wyatt wanted to cover Ji-yu Jinglian's escape as soon as possible. Unfortunately, they were ambushed by the rebel army and had no choice but to split up. After that, there was no news of Ji-yu Jinglian. When Chu-ho heard this, he frowned. "When we split up, how many people did Ji-yu Jinglian have?" "About 30 people. 5 of them were mercenaries. They were very strong." "That means someone is protecting him." "Yes. Then from what you can see, where could he be now?" The man was suddenly in a dilemma. "Since you're asking, I can't say. Jamal is not big, but it's not small either. It has a radius of 100 miles. All the communication towers have been disconnected. CEO Ji-yu doesn't have a satellite phone with him, so we can't contact him. But I'm guessing that they won't be too far away. After all, the neutral zone has fallen. It's too chaotic outside. CEO Ji-yu and the rest should have found a place to hide. Now, other than some of the armed forces, no one else can enter." "Waiting for rescue? Who are they waiting for?" "I heard that everyone in the embassy has evacuated. Some of the Chinese citizens haven't. But the fleet should be here soon. I'm guessing that they'll be heading in the direction of the embassy." Chu-ho immediately interrupted him and said, "The embassy is now sealed off. There are rebel forces outside. It's a war zone. It's very dangerous to walk to the embassy." The man was puzzled. "How did you get in?" Car. That person turned pale with fright. "You just drove your car in so openly? There are so many checkpoints and they're all occupied by the rebel army. I didn't pass through the checkpoints. I walked through the small path." Chu-ho paused and suddenly sighed. "But the car is out of gas now. Do you have gas here?" "We do." "Are you going to look for CEO Ji-yu now?" The man said with a headache, "You can't do it during the day. At night, the war zone stops. During the day, it's chaotic outside. It's too dangerous." Why don't you stay here and rest for the night? When night falls, you can go out and look for him. It's not too late. Chu-ho nodded. I know. She lowered her head and said to Lin Shi, let's rest here for the night. Yes. Chu-ho and Lin Shi went to the second floor and found a corner. There was no bed, only a mat, and they lay down. At this time, the weather was already a little cold. Just lying on the mat without any shelter, it was inevitable that it would be a bit cold. Lin Shi curled up in a corner, shivering from the cold. Suddenly, a coat covered his body. Lin Shi turned his head and saw that Chu-ho had taken off his thick coat and covered him with it. She only had a combat vest on her body, which was very thin. Lin Shi's heart warmed. He was a little touched, but he asked uneasily, aren't you cold? It's not cold. I'm used to it. She had experienced even more difficult environments. Compared to the time when she had to walk in the humid rainforest, this environment paled in comparison. She lay down, but from the corner of her eye, she saw Lin Shi move closer to her. He covered her with his clothes and hugged her tightly. Chapter 35-39. Chu-ho also closed her eyes. Perhaps she was too tired from rushing through the night and the high intensity of her mental strength, so she fell asleep immediately. He actually fell into a deep sleep. When she woke up again, she was called by Lin Shi. Chu-ho opened her eyes and saw the black muzzle of a gun. The hole in the distance was emitting cold air. Almost instinctively, she grabbed the gun at her waist. However, the next second, a bayonet was right in front of her. She recognized the gun. It was an AK-47 equipped with a sharp triangular bayonet. The body of the bayonet was ridged. It was a three-sided bayonet with 3 blood grooves. This meant that when the bayonet pierced into the human body, it would rapidly increase the bleeding through the blood grooves on the 3 sides. The muscles would contract and be unable to adhere to the surface of the bayonet. The wound would appear as a square hole and would not be able to stop the bleeding and heal. This meant that such a wound could not be treated immediately. If there was too much bleeding, it would be fatal. Moreover, in such an environment, once the bayonet pierced through, it would be fatal. Chu-ho looked at the gun and saw that the person holding the gun was a black man wearing tattered clothes but a red headscarf. She immediately recognized that this was the rebel army. The bayonet was only an inch away from her glabella. Even if he did not make a move, she would be stabbed in the glabella if she moved slightly. Chu-ho quickly calmed down. From the corner of her eye, she saw Lin Shi kneeling on the ground with his head in his hands. Looking from afar, downstairs, a large group of black men with red headscarves were standing in the middle of the field with guns in their hands. Rows of civilians were kneeling on the ground with their heads in their hands, trembling. Chu-ho suddenly realized that this place had been invaded by the rebel army. She let go of the pistol and raised her hands, indicating that she should give up resisting. Another black man walked over and took the gun from her waist. Then, he grabbed her collar and threw her to the middle of the field. In just a short time, she had a preliminary understanding of the current situation. Yesterday at the bottom of the road, the path she had taken to get here was all muddy. The car left deep tire marks along the way. These marks probably attracted the rebel army's attention. They followed the traces and followed all the way here, exposing this shelter. Chu-ho was dragged all the way downstairs. Everyone glared at her angrily. Her arrival had also attracted the rebel army. They originally had a chance to hide in the rescue team, but now, this place was exposed by her, implicating so many people. Chu-ho was thrown into the middle of the field. He questioned, "Whose car is this?" She remained silent. The car was locked, so these people smashed the car window and found her combat bag. They found a lot of things and found the documents in the bag. So, they suspected that the owner of the car was a spy from the government who came to investigate. Chu-ho did not say anything. She couldn't admit it. Moreover, there was a lot of cash, food, and fresh water in the car. If she admitted it, they would definitely take away her car keys, open the car, and rob all the food inside. The rebel soldiers saw that the entire place was silent. They searched the crowd and suddenly walked into the crowd and pulled Lin Shi out. He was the youngest child present. The soldier directly flipped over an oil barrel from the side, opened the cap, and directly poured the oil all over him. Chapter 35-40. Lin Shi hugged his body tightly, but he did not beg for mercy. He knelt on the ground and looked up. His eyes were filled with hatred as he stared at the soldiers. He knew that the car belonged to Chu Ho, but he did not say anything. The soldier lit a match and waved it. He threatened, "I'll ask again. Whose car is this?" Everyone was so nervous that they could not say a coherent sentence. However, many of them glanced at Chu Ho as if they were signaling something to the soldiers. At this critical juncture, they naturally wanted to save their own lives. The lives of others were not important. The soldiers looked at Chu Ho suspiciously. When Chu Ho saw this, he could no longer remain silent. He suddenly said, "This is my car. It has nothing to do with this child." Lin Shi looked at him in surprise. He was deeply moved. "Hand over the car keys." Chu Ho took a deep breath. He calmly took out the keys from his trouser pocket and threw them to them. When the soldier saw this, he sneered and threw the lit match at Lin Shi. At this moment, his body was covered in gasoline. If the match landed beside him, he would definitely die. Lin Shi closed his eyes in despair. Chu Ho reacted quickly and leaped toward Lin Shi. At the same time, seeing that she had suddenly stood up, the vigilant soldier raised his gun and pulled the trigger. The bullet pierced through the air and brushed past her waist. It passed through the bullets and hit a man behind Chu Ho, piercing his thigh. He cried out in pain and hugged his thigh as he twitched. There was no fire as expected. Lin Shi opened her eyes in disbelief, only to see Chu He pouncing on her. In her palm, she caught the matchstick tightly and snapped it into two. The skin on her palm was scalded, and it was a shocking red. Chu Ho pulled him into his arms and said solemnly, "I promised you that I would protect you. I have to keep my word." Lin Shi's eyes flickered and tears flowed out. A few soldiers raised their guns and aimed at Chu Ho. Chu Ho turned around and shielded Lin Shi behind him. He said word by word, "There's cash and food in the car. I hid them in a place. Use these to exchange for this child's life. Take us there. If you let this child go, I'll tell you." The soldiers looked at each other before putting away their guns. Chu Ho immediately said to Lin Shi, "Quickly find a place to hide." Lin Shi shook his head and said firmly, "I want to be with you. Be good, I'm fine. Find a place to hide, okay? No matter what happens, don't come out." Lin Shi wavered a little. Gritting his teeth, he stood up and walked a few steps. Seeing that the soldiers seemed to have tacitly agreed to let him go, he ran into the warehouse, found a secret room, and hid himself. Chu Ho stood up and covered his wound. He followed the soldiers out of the factory and to the parking lot. "Where are the money and things?" Chu Ho pretended to be in pain and said with difficulty, "It's in the secret compartment of the armrest." "Take it out." I'm injured," Chu Ho said with difficulty. "I don't have any strength, be honest." Two soldiers opened the car door and went into the car to rummage through it. Chu Ho narrowed his eyes and looked around. There were a total of 4 soldiers here. 2 of them went into the car to look for things. Their backs were facing him, so they couldn't see his every move. Chapter 35-41. Chu Ho kicked the 2 soldiers into the car and locked the door. Her smooth movements were completed within a few seconds. Before the other 2 soldiers could react, Chu Ho flashed behind them. Just as they raised their pistols to aim at her, Chu Ho grabbed that person's arm and twisted it hard. She aimed at his elbow joint and heard a catcher sound as the joint fell off. She lifted her leg and kicked him a few meters away. Chu Ho snatched the gun and casually fired 2 shots at the other soldier who was about to pull the trigger. In an instant, that person's glabella was shot and he fell to the ground. The soldier who was kicked away struggled to get up from the ground. He pulled out a tri-edge army knife from his waist and waved it at her. Chu Ho dodged nimbly and took the opportunity to raise her fist and hit him hard on the nose. The most vulnerable parts of a person's face were the eyes and the bridge of the nose. Her punch directly broke that person's nose. The soldier held onto his bleeding nose and howled in pain. However, before he could shout out a coherent sentence, Chu Ho's ghostly figure flashed behind him and locked his neck from behind. She exerted strength in her arm and broke his throat. These 2 pitiful soldiers, until they died, did not expect that this frail-looking woman would have such powerful skills. They were afraid of her because she had a weapon on her and were worried that she was from some military unit or the government army. However, no one would have thought that her skills were comparable to the top mercenaries. The two soldiers in the car saw this scene and knew that this woman's skills were definitely not something they could win against. Hence, they frantically honked the car horn, hoping that the sound would attract the attention of the other soldiers in the factory. Chu-ho became alert. She suddenly walked to the front of the car and held onto the edge of the car roof. She then kicked the mailbox at the bottom of the car. She was wearing combat boots that were equipped with a short blade. With a kick, a dent appeared in the fuel tank. She kicked again fiercely and the sharp short blade directly cut a hole in the fuel tank. A stream of air flowed into the fuel tank. She turned around and plunged into the bushes at the side. The soldiers in the factory heard the sound of the horn and hurriedly armed themselves. They carried their submachine guns and rushed out. However, when they walked out of the door, they saw that there was no one around. It was dead silent. They glanced at the car and saw two corpses lying beside it. The leader took a look and his expression turned cold. He walked over and grabbed one of the corpses by the collar to check his breathing. He was already dead. What happened? Where was that woman? The two soldiers in the car kept hitting the window. The leader walked over, bent his arm and broke the window with his elbow. The two soldiers tried to climb out of the car window. However, the leader immediately signaled them to keep quiet. He could vaguely hear the sound of dripping. It was especially clear in this quiet night. The leader looked around and suddenly realized that the sound was coming from the bottom. He squatted down and was surprised to see that there was a pool of oil on the floor of the room, giving off a pungent smell of petrol. There was a hole in the fuel tank and petrol was leaking all over the floor. Chapter 35-42. Before he could make a run for it, Chuhi narrowed her eyes and pulled the trigger from the bushes. Bang! A bullet whizzed through the air. Boom! The bullet accurately hit the fuel tank. The fuel tank was already on the verge of exploding when it came into contact with the oxygen. With the ignition of the gasoline and the sparks from the bullet, a strong explosion occurred in an instant. The entire vehicle exploded, and the flames soared into the sky. The powerful shockwave was like an avalanche, sweeping everyone to the ground. A row of soldiers who couldn't dodge in time were instantly swallowed up by the flames. The flames almost lit up half the night sky. The violent explosion was deafening. Chu-ho was also pushed to the ground by the blast. She crawled on the ground until the blast subsided. Then she got up and slowly walked out of the bushes. She glanced at the volcanic sea of fire and turned to walk back to the factory. One of them was pushed to the side by the blast and vomited blood. In his blurry vision, he struggled to support his body, raised his hand, and shot at her abdomen. Fart! Chu-ho felt as if her abdomen had been hit by something. Immediately after, she felt a burning pain and a terrifying wound appeared on her abdomen. She clutched her bleeding abdomen and staggered. She knelt on the ground on one knee. When she turned around, she saw the soldier fall to the ground heavily and take his last breath. She struggled to stand. At first, she did not feel anything when she was shot. However, after taking a step, she could not stand anymore. She swayed and fell to the ground. The pain was so intense that she broke out in a cold sweat. Chu-ho struggled to support her body. She immediately tore the vest on her body and pressed on the wound to squeeze out the blood clots. The dagger was tied to the back of her waist. The bullet accurately pierced through the dagger and embedded itself in her skin. Fortunately, the dagger blocked the bullet and did not penetrate too deeply. However, the pain was that the dagger was penetrated. The metal skin stuck to the wound, and the pain was heart-wrenching. Chu-ho crawled to the side of the tree with great difficulty and knelt on the ground. Biting his collar tightly, he tied the cloth around his wound and pulled out the dagger. After disinfecting it with fire, he endured the pain and made a cross on the wound. Then, he pulled out the bullet with his bare hands. The excruciating pain caused her to break out in a cold sweat. She closed her eyes, disinfected the wound, and bandaged it. She took out some cotton wool from her trousers and roughly bandaged the wound. It hurt so much that he was confused. She held on to the tree trunk and stood up. However, she only felt the world before her eyes turned dark. Her entire back seemed to have lost all feeling. It was numb, and only pain was constantly transmitted to her. Chu-ho could no longer stand steadily and fainted. Before she closed her eyes, she vaguely saw a few black soldiers running towards her. They were holding their guns and staring at her. When she woke up again, she was splashed with a basin of salt water. The salt water flowed directly into her wound, and she woke up in pain. Hiss! Chu-ho opened her eyes abruptly. The salt water flowed into her eyes, and it was bitter and painful. Immediately after, her wrists were tightly bound and her toes were off the ground. These reminded her that she was hanging from a tree branch. A few black soldiers pointed their guns at her. One of them, who was holding a red headscarf, pointed at her and asked in the local language, "Who are you? Did you kill these brothers?" Chapter 35:43. When the man saw this, he was so angry that he kicked her. Chu-ho's body slammed into a thick tree trunk. She was in so much pain that she couldn't scream. "Speak." Chu-ho sneered and said contemptuously, "I'm not from the government." The leader didn't believe her at all. He was certain that Chu-ho was a mercenary sent by the government or an intelligence agent from some organization. It was because of this that Chu-ho didn't bother to explain. Anyway, even if she said she wasn't and revealed her identity, they might not believe her. Chu-ho heard someone ask, "Captain, how should we deal with this person?" In her days, she only heard the leader say, "Behead her," as an example to the public. Beheading was the most common method used by terrorists. Perhaps the people who lived in peaceful countries couldn't understand this method. The so-called beheading mentioned by these rebels was to tie the person's hands and feet and make them kneel on the ground. Then, they would use a very blunt butcher's knife to cut the throat bit by bit. Rather than beheading, it was more like cutting the throat. As the victim wouldn't die immediately, he would be able to see clearly how his throat was cut. Hence, this method of death was especially painful. Hence, the blade was very blunt. It was to make the victim suffer as much pain as possible to promote martial arts. When Chu-ho heard this, she didn't show much fear on her face. She was pushed to the ground. A soldier grabbed her hair and forced her to kneel on the ground. Then, he took out a small rusty knife from behind him and slowly pressed it against her neck. Chu-ho could feel the cold blade against her skin. She slowly closed her eyes. However, the expected pain didn't come. Vaguely, she felt the hand that was grabbing her loosening its grip, and the knife fell to the ground. Immediately after, hot scarlet blood fell onto her shoulder and soaked her clothes. Chu-hee woke up at once and looked up in surprise, only to be met with a lifeless face. The soldier's eyes were wide open. He was attacked from behind. A sharp triangular military knife almost pierced his heart. He fell weakly on top of her. Chu-ho couldn't bear it anymore and fell to the ground. Bang, bang, bang. She immediately recognized that it was the sound of a gun. The barrel of the cloud-shot gun was very thick, and the diameter of the muzzle was at most 20 millimeters. It had a lot of firepower and was very wide. It was a weapon with terrifying explosive power in close combat. If a bullet were to hit a human body, the wound would explode and expand, resulting in a one-hit kill. If the gun was fired at close range, the bullet could directly send a person flying. Chu-ho fell to the ground. He vaguely saw a particularly tall man, fully armed, with 3 pistols on his back and 2 rows of bullets on his shoulder. He held a gun and agilely dodged the soldiers' attacks. None of the bullets missed. In just a short moment, more than a dozen soldiers present were shot and fell to the ground. Just then, a child ran to her side and patted her face gently. He asked nervously, "Sister, are you okay?" Chu-ho looked up and met Lin Shi's anxious eyes. "It's you." "Yes." Lin Shi dragged her to the front of a tree and used a dagger to cut the rope that tied her up. However, he found the wound on her abdomen and frowned in pain. "How are you? Are you okay? You're injured." Chapter 35:44. "Didn't I tell you to hide?" Lin Shi said, "There's a secret passage behind the factory. I escaped through that secret passage. I followed the clues you provided and found the person you were talking about. Jiyu Jinglian. Is that his name?" Chu-ho was stunned. She could not help but look at the man. In the night, the man put away his gun and checked the corpses on the ground one by one. If he found someone who was still alive, he would kill him directly. He stood up and turned around. His handsome and heroic face came into her sight. Ji-yu, she opened her mouth and widened her eyes in disbelief. She did not expect him to appear. Ji-yu Jinglian strode over and squatted in front of her. As he moved, the bullets on his body made a tinkling sound. He was wearing a combat uniform and a thick bulletproof vest. His limbs were tied with guns, ammunition, and all kinds of cold weapons. After leaving Werther, he took away all the equipment, guns, ammunition, and bulletproof vests. He was fully armed. He killed his way out of Werther. He led his men and horses and wanted to kill his way out of the fallen area. However, he did not expect to meet a child who was almost attacked on the way. Initially, he was too lazy to care. However, for some reason, he suddenly thought of Xiao Bao. He did not know why, but he saved the child. The child who was saved grabbed him and asked nervously where someone was going. Coincidentally, he was the person the child was looking for. The child said that a young sister came to North Africa to look for him and was now in danger. He asked who it was, but the child could not tell him the name. He only said that it was a very powerful person. He immediately thought of Chu Ho. However, why would she appear here? It was unbelievable. On the way here, he saw a person hanging on a tree branch at the entrance of the factory. He recognized her at a glance. He secretly ambushed and shot a few soldiers. Ji-yu Jinglian looked at Chu Ho nervously. When he saw the wound on her abdomen that was roughly bandaged, he was stunned. "You're injured." "I'm fine. I was shot." "What about the bullet? Did you take it out?" Take. As Chu Ho spoke, she tried to support her body and stand up. However, she overestimated herself. Just as she stood up, she knelt on the ground due to exhaustion. Ji-yu Jinglian reached out and supported her. Seeing that she was seriously injured, his tone became cold. "Why are you here?" I came to find you." Halfway through his words, Chu Ho could no longer make a sound. His eyelids twitched violently, and he actually fainted. Ji-yu Jinglian caught her nimbly and pulled her into his arms. His face was full of heartache. This stupid woman actually found her way here. Looking for him? He was clearly courting death. He was a little angry. What kind of place was this? It was such a chaotic place, filled with the flames of war, smoke, and endless disputes. Only people wanted to escape, but she actually rushed here rashly. Crazy. His heart ached as he hugged her tightly, as though he was afraid that she would vanish into thin air in his arms. He frowned and said, "Crazy woman. What should we do?" "Lin," she asked anxiously, "will sister be okay? Let's go back to the base first and check on her injuries." "Okay." As Lin she spoke, he was about to carry Chu Ho. However, Ji-yu Jinglian was one step ahead of him. He carried Chu Ho with one hand and held a gun with the other, ready to deal with any sudden attack. Chapter 35-45. Lin she was shocked. He didn't expect this man to be strong enough to carry a woman with one hand. It was too terrifying. Although Chu Ho was very thin, she was still quite tall. He actually carried her with one hand and his expression didn't change at all. Ji-yu Jinglian carried her and turned around, only to see that Lin she was still in a daze. He frowned and said coldly, "Follow me." Oh, okay. Lin she immediately chased after him. The three of them walked all the way and arrived at a bomb shelter. Ji-yu Jinglian was originally with the main group, but because Yi Linshi appeared along the way, he came with him to look for Chu Ho. As a result, they lost contact with the main group. They had originally planned to go to the signal tower to restore the broken signal and then contact for backup. Now that they had parted ways and Chu Ho was injured, Ji-yu Jinglian planned to find a place to hide and treat her wound. It was dark and damp in the bomb shelter. Ji-yu Jinglian placed Chu Ho in a relatively dry place. He turned around and instructed Lin Shi, "Bring the gauze and iodine over." Lin Shi carried Chu Ho's combat bag over. He rummaged through the bag for the iodine and gauze and passed them to Ji-yu Jinglian. Ji-yu Jinglian untied the gauze and checked the wound. There was an obvious gunshot wound on her waist and abdomen. There was a cross on the wound, but there was no bullet shell. The bullet had been removed. Jiyu Jinglian was very surprised. This cross was probably made by removing the bullet. Who did it? Could it be that she did it herself? How did she do it? A woman actually had such terrifying willpower when she was injured by a gunshot. She could actually remove the bullet by herself. However, because of the circumstances, the wound was not well treated. If it was dragged out, it could easily become infected. Jiyu Jinglian disinfected the wound with iodine. After cleaning it thoroughly, he stopped the bleeding. He covered the wound with a clean gauze and bandaged it. It was especially painful to clean the wound. Chu-ho woke up from the pain. She hissed and opened her eyes. Her beautiful eyebrows were slightly furrowed. Jiyu Jinglian glanced at her. "Does it hurt?" Chu-ho nodded and his breathing quickened. "Yes, a little." Jiyu Jinglian said, "Bear with it. If the wound was not treated properly, it could easily become infected and inflamed." After he bandaged the wound, Chu-ho finally closed his eyes and his breathing gradually stabilized. Jiyu Jinglian suddenly asked, "Why are you here?" Chu-ho furrowed her brows, but a strange blush appeared on her face. She turned her face away, not looking at his face, and did not say a word for a long time. She had her pride. She could not possibly tell Jiyu Jinglian that she risked her life to come to such a war-torn area to look for him because she was worried. It was even more impossible for her to say that she was worried that something would happen to him or that Xiao Bao would lose his father. Now that she saw that he was safe, her heart was at ease. Jiyu Jinglian saw that she did not speak. Her pale face only had a slight blush on it. It was extremely strange. He asked suspiciously, "Are you worried about me?" "No." Chu-ho almost reflexively interrupted him. She said coldly, "Do you think I'm here for you?" Jiyu Jinglian was speechless. Wasn't that the case? Wasn't her words just giving herself away? Chapter 35-46. Chu-ho saw that her words weren't convincing and said expressionlessly, "I came here just to what? To play." Jiyu Jinglian was speechless. Play? Now that the war was raging and most of North Africa had fallen into the flames of war, she came here, to play? Jiyu Jinglian said calmly, stubborn. Chu-ho heard this but didn't want to talk to him. She then realized that she was in Jiyu Jinglian's arms and they were very close to each other. The intimacy between the two of them was unreasonable and she was instantly alarmed. You don't have to hug me." "Oh." Jiyu Jinglian didn't say anything else and let go of her. Chu-ho fell to the ground and stretched her wound, causing her to frown in pain. Lin Shi immediately rushed over anxiously and said to Jiyu Jinglian angrily, "Hey, why aren't you gentlemanly at all? Sister is injured." Jiyu Jinglian said calmly, "She said she didn't want me to hug her." Lin Shishan added, "Women always say one thing and mean another. She might say she doesn't want you to hug her, but she probably wants you to hug her." Chu-ho couldn't take it anymore. She grimaced and said, "I didn't say that." Lin Shi pouted and hurriedly asked worriedly, "Sister, are you all right? Does your wound hurt?" Chu-ho groaned and said angrily, "It doesn't hurt." Jiyu Jinglian glanced at her lightly and pulled her into his arms again. Chu-ho struggled a little unnaturally, but Jiyu Jinglian's voice became gentler. He patted her back gently and said calmly, "All right, stop talking." Chu-ho stopped talking. "Don't worry. Go to sleep." Jiyu Jinglian said again, "Have a good sleep. We'll continue our journey when we wake up." She nodded and suddenly asked curiously, "Where are we going?" Chu-ho asked curiously, "How are we going to leave later? How do we leave North Africa? There is a signal base station more than 10 miles away from here. My men and I have agreed to meet at the signal tower. When the signal is restored, we will contact my rescue team stationed in North Africa. By then, we will be able to leave this place." When Chu-ho heard this, he grunted and closed his eyes. She was really tired, so she fell asleep immediately. Jiyu Jinglian couldn't help but smile when he heard her breathing. He lowered his eyes and gently planted a kiss on her forehead. How could he not know why Chu-ho had come? Although she was stubborn and did not mean what she said, For a woman who did not hesitate to brave the flames of war to come to North Africa and get injured all over, who did she do it for? However, even though she was stubborn and refused to say anything, he was kind enough to not expose her. Lin Shi also found a place to lie down. After going through so many things, he was already extremely tired, so he quickly fell asleep. Jiyu Jinglian also closed his eyes. The air raid shelter was very remote. Moreover, before entering the shelter, he had deliberately buried landmines at the entrance. If an enemy entered, it would definitely trigger the mechanism, giving him a lot of time to react. Jiyu Jinglian hugged Chu Ho tightly and also fell asleep. The three of them curled up in the air raid shelter. When Chu Ho woke up again, the sky outside the shelter was gradually darkening. Chapter 35-47. When she opened her eyes, she saw Jiyu Jinglian's head resting gently on her shoulder. His warm breath kept brushing against her cheeks. For a moment, she felt as if all the air that entered her lungs was coming from him. The breath that he exhaled seemed to be slightly hot. She only felt that her face was suddenly burning red. Instinctively, she pushed him, but his body did not move. He hugged her so tightly that she had the illusion that she was his most precious treasure. Chu Ho's expression became more and more unnatural. She saw that Jiyu Jinglian's breathing was heavy. It was probably because he had been too tired in the past few days that he fell into a deep sleep. She did not know when he had fallen asleep, so she could not bear to wake him up. Chu Ho closed her eyes and planned to rest for a while more. Suddenly, there was a shocking explosion at the entrance of the cave. The ear-piercing sound was deafening. Her ears were suddenly ringing from the explosion. Jiyu Jinglian also woke up instantly. He raised his head and heard a soft rustling sound coming from the entrance of the cave. Someone's coming. Chu Ho also reacted. She immediately stood up, picked up the submachine gun from the ground, and crouched in the corner. Jiyu Jinglian covered the entrance of the cave and held his breath vigilantly. However, the soft rustling sound outside the cave suddenly went far away. They did not seem to have noticed the entrance of the cave that was covered by the bushes. Immediately after, they heard the rumbling sound of tanks passing by outside the cave. Chu Ho carefully walked to the entrance of the cave. She pushed the bushes aside and looked outside. However, she saw several helicopters hovering in the sky above the coconut grove. The fog was thick, and visibility was extremely low. The huge leaf fans were making a desperate sound. "We should go," Jiyu Jinglian said. "Let's go now." Chu Ho nodded. Jiyu Jinglian asked nervously, "Can you walk on your own?" "Yes. I'm fine." After sleeping for a few hours, the pain of the wound had subsided a lot. She walked over and carried the combat bag. Jiyu Jinglian walked over, woke Lin Shi up, and gave him a gun. If they left this place, they might be ambushed by the rebel army at any time. It was impossible for him to carry him, so he could only do his best to cover him. However, even if he was a child, he still needed to carry a weapon with him under such circumstances. But Lin Shi said, "It's okay, I know how to use a gun." Growing up in such an environment, he knew how to use guns and basic self-defense. Jiyu Jinglian gave him a few more magazines. Lin Shi kept the magazines close to his body, and the three of them left the cave. Just as they walked out of the cave, the loud sound suddenly became clearer. Bullets rained down in front of him. Jiyu Jinglian covered Lin Shi while Chu Ho followed behind him. One of them charged forward while the other had his back to Jiyu Jinglian to observe the situation behind them and provide cover. The three of them ran wildly in the rain of bullets. The clamor was accompanied by the sound of AK shots, and the tragic sound of gunfire reverberated in their eardrums. Jiyu Jinglian gave the only helmet to Lin Shi. 3 heavy bullets hung on his shoulders, 3 guns on his back, and a heavy Gatling gun in his hands. He ran at the front to open up a path. His pace was calm and fast. He turned back to estimate the distance and shouted at the top of his lungs, "Fire!" Chapter 35-48. The two of them cooperated well. At this moment, someone seemed to have discovered their deliberate trail, so they threw an infrared time grenade at them. Chu Ho saw it at a glance. This grenade took about 10 seconds to detonate. Chu Ho immediately walked over and kicked the grenade away. Jiyu Jinglian raised his AK-47 and fired a bullet, directly detonating the grenade. Chu Ho turned around and pushed Lin Shi to the ground. A scorching wave rushed over and brushed past their backs. Behind them, a huge cluster of flames rose, accompanied by heart-wrenching screams. It formed a towering wall of fire about 100 meters long in the coconut forest. Chu Ho struggled to support her body. She turned her head and glanced back. She saw several tanks passing through the ferocious fire and slowly approaching. The wave of air swept over violently. The tanks crossed the line of fire, and more than a dozen soldiers rushed down. Jiyu Jinglian had a long string of bullets on his shoulder, and his face was covered in sweat. He carried the extremely heavy Gatling gun and fired fiercely at the team behind him. Chu Ho held the XM-109 sniper rifle, and blood-white hot liquid sprayed endlessly at the edge of the forest. She didn't know how many people she had shot, but she vaguely felt that she had returned to her former mercenary career. As long as there was a bullet left, she would continue to slaughter lives. Several laser beams quickly scanned the forest. These were special instruments to detect life and electronic equipment. Jiyu Jinglian recognized them immediately. He gritted his teeth, nimbly turned over, and pulled off all the radio communication equipment on himself and Chu Ho, and threw them into the distance. The laser beam's positioning was messy. With a boom, a guided missile hit the position where the radio was thrown. Jiyu Jinglian grabbed Chu Ho's hand. Chu Ho directly hugged Lin Shi in her arms and rushed into the forest, temporarily obtaining cover. Chu Ho felt for the straw in her collar and hurriedly drank 2 mouthfuls of water. There wasn't much water stored in her jacket. She didn't even have time to add purification powder. The smell of water made her retch. But in this situation, there was no time to care so much. We're still 10 miles away from the signal tower. Jiyu Jinglian paused for a moment. The signal base station was built by Werther, so it's very safe. The communication equipment inside is more complete. After we go in, we'll send out a signal and shield the surroundings. We'll be temporarily protected. Expressionlessly, He shook out the contents of her backpack and handed the energy bars and night vision goggles to Jiyu Jinglian. She then threw the AK and RPG-7B quiver on her back in front of him and began to swiftly load the Gatling gun with ammunition. Jiyu Jinglian broke off a piece of energy bar and stuffed it into his mouth. He mixed it with his saliva and quickly strapped his AK and rocket launcher to his shoulder. The atmosphere instantly became heavy. He looked at Chu Ho in front of him, and his hands froze. His eyebrows gradually became heavy. The odds are against us. Jiyu Jinglian said, "You also know that this place is surrounded by the rebel army. At this critical moment, I'll cover you. You leave first." Chu Ho raised her face, twitched the corner of her lips, threw the water bottle to Silver Fox, and quickly got up. "Listen, Jiyu Jinglian, we're together. If we want to leave, we'll leave together." Jiyu Jinglian didn't say anything. He knew, and Chu Ho probably also understood, that the current situation wasn't optimistic. Jiyu Jinglian wanted to protect her, even at the cost of his life. Chapter 35-49. Seeing that he was silent, Chu Ho's face darkened. She grabbed his chin and squeezed it tightly. "Listen up. Either we leave North Africa together, or we die together. There are no other options." Jiyu Jinglian looked up. His eyes flickered and his lips suddenly curved. "You won't regret it." This woman was actually willing to risk her life with him. In such a dangerous environment, she said that she would either leave with him or die together. Was she really not afraid? Of course. From the moment I decided to step on the cargo ship to North Africa, I won't regret it. Jiyu Jinglian also stood up and stared at her for a long time. Seeing that he kept staring at her, Chu Ho couldn't help but take half a step back. She said guiltily, "What are you doing?" "So, you admit it." Jiyu Jinglian said this without rhyme or reason. Chu Ho frowned. She didn't understand what he was trying to say. "What do you mean? You admit that you came to North Africa because you were worried about me." When Chu Ho heard this, her face immediately flushed red. She clenched her fists. Before she could refute, Jiyu Jinglian suddenly took a step forward and hugged her tightly with his right hand. He clasped the back of her neck and kissed her deeply. Lin, she inadvertently saw this intimate scene. Her face immediately turned red and she immediately covered her face with both hands. It was not suitable for children. See no evil, hear no evil. Chu Ho wanted to push him away, but Jiyu Jinglian held her tightly. The more she struggled, the deeper she sank into his arms. Jiyu Jinglian kissed her until she was about to suffocate. He then released her, but he still wanted more and pecked her blushing face. Chu Ho's face became even hotter. She wanted to rebuke him, but she couldn't say a word for a long time. Okay, don't waste time. Jiyu Jinglian turned the bag over and all the equipment fell to the ground at once. When Chu Ho heard this, anger rose in her heart. What did he mean by don't waste time? He was clearly the one who kissed her, and he still had the cheek to tell her not to waste time. She was about to explode when Jiyu Jinglian handed her a gun. A charming smile appeared on his handsome face that was stained with dust. Let's kill our way out. Chu Ho immediately laughed. She took the gun from him and tied it to her waist. At this moment, the winds of war in the west and artillery fire spread. Thick smoke billowed from the coconut grove, and flames flickered. The HU-5 grenade exploded with a huge shockwave. The earth shook, and the aura of death once again gathered around the land. The tank rumbled past the ruins, the wreckage, and the shadows of the trees. The helicopter hovered in the air, and several white signal lights swept through the forest. Chu-hee carefully hunched her back and snuck into the forest alone. The thorns mercilessly slashed across her cheeks, causing blood to gush out of the wounds. She hugged a Barrett M99 sniper rifle. Her footsteps were steady, her expression was cold, and her face was covered in dust. She leaned against a hidden tree and squatted down. She took out a straw from her collar and drank the last mouthful of water stored in her jacket. Her lips were still pale and dry. Although she was wearing a bulletproof vest over her camouflage uniform, her beautiful figure was still exposed. Chapter 3550. Jiyu Jinglian and Lin, she followed closely behind her. They leaned against the barrier and raised their hands to wipe away the blood and dirt on their faces. Chu Ho looked at him. Jiyu Jinglian's hair was messed up in the wind, and his handsome face was ravaged by the wind. Beneath his handsome eyebrows was a pair of seductive peach blossom eyes. Time ticked by. Chu Ho rested for a while before turning around and crouching behind a tree. She raised the heavy sniper rifle in her hand and aimed accurately at the lens. She slowly narrowed one eye and focused all her attention on the sniper scope. She held her breath and waited calmly. She counted silently in her heart. Suddenly, Chu Ho pulled the trigger. The rapid ammunition detonated the improvised explosive device that had been deployed earlier. With a loud bang, a tank was blocked 100 meters away from the wall of fire. Chu Ho slung the sniper rifle over her shoulder and injected the last dose of adrenaline. She pulled out a military-grade dagger and ran toward the tank. Jiyu Jinglian quickly followed. An M1A1 tank was parked quietly in place. At that moment, a nimble figure silently snuck behind the tank and opened the door to the combat room. The soldier in the combat room didn't even have time to see who it was before he was punched in the head. Before he could react, a strong arm picked up his tottering body and twirled the dagger in the soldier's hand. The poor man felt a chill in his throat and hot blood sprayed onto the passenger seat. The stench of blood assailed his nostrils. Chu Ho quickly used the same method to sneak into the engine room, leaving behind a collapsed corpse and a messy cabin. She crept toward the cockpit. Zaifi, there's an affair. Zaifi, please answer if you hear me. Please answer if you hear me. Zaifi, quickly lock onto the target. A man's standard English voice rang out from the cockpit of the tank. However, there was an eerie silence in the cabin. No one answered. A sturdy combat boot stepped on a corpse that was gradually turning cold. Chu Ho lifted his cold face. Blood was flowing from the dagger in front of him. She wiped away the blood that had splattered on her face, and her eyes revealed a ferocious look. She kicked away the corpse that was in the way and cut off the radio communication. The noise stopped abruptly, and the cabin returned to silence. She was very familiar with the operation of the tank. In just a few seconds, Chu Ho quickly adapted to the operation of the M1A1. Jiyu Jinglian also got into the tank. One person was in charge of setting up the tank, while the other was in charge of the turret. She skillfully pushed the joystick and cut into the order, her cold eyes surging like a storm. Zafi. Please answer if you hear me. Please answer if you hear me. In the cockpit of another tank, a man with chestnut hair shouted at the top of his lungs. He cursed as he gasped for breath, the veins on his forehead bulging. The burly man was sweating profusely as an inexplicable uneasiness rose in his heart. In that breathtaking moment, a beam of fire whistled through the air. The man with chestnut hair only felt the cabin shake violently. He was so shocked that he fell back into his seat. This shot had fatally struck the main turret of the tank, and the core of the attack had been accurately destroyed. Chapter 3551. Chu-ho held the joystick with both hands, and her gaze was domineering. Ji-yu Jinglian controlled the turret and kept attacking the target. Under the attack of the artillery, the target tank crashed into a tree trunk and flipped over. You drove the tank well. Ji-yu Jinglian rarely praised. Chu-ho also said, your aim is not bad. The two of them looked at each other and smiled. At such a dangerous moment, the two of them could still talk and laugh so easily. Chu-ho said, I've driven tanks, nuclear submarines, and armored vehicles before. Ji-yu Jinglian said, this is the first time in my life that I've driven a tank. But I saw that you were so familiar with it that I thought you had experience. I'm just learning now. The two of them reached a safe area and found Lin Shi. Chu-ho drove the tank until they were outside the battlefield. There was an armored vehicle parked by the side of the road. When the lights came on, there was someone inside. Chu-ho used the same trick again and sneaked into the armored vehicle. After killing the soldiers who had let down their guard, Ji-yu Jinglian got into the car with Lin Shi. She drove the armored vehicle, and the three of them sped towards the signal base station. The night was dark, and dark clouds covered the moon. The hazy light and shadow shone into the abandoned signal tower, making it look like a lonely city. The three of them rushed to the signal base station, but Ji-yu Jinglian did not see anyone else. He walked into the signal base station, but there was no one inside. Ji-yu Jinglian's eyes darkened, but he had already guessed that the team that was separated from him was probably dead. After all, having too many people would be a burden. That team was not made up of elite soldiers. There were many engineers and higher-ups in it. They did not have the strength to truss a chicken and could not even shoot accurately. It was indeed difficult to break out of the encirclement with so many people. If it were not for Chu-ho, he would not have been able to kill his way out on his own. After all, war was merciless. No one had an absolute halo, and deaths and injuries were inevitable. Chu-ho also expected that those people had probably died in the battlefield, but she heard Ji-yu Jinglian say, we don't have engineers. The signal may not be able to be repaired. It's all right. Chu-ho smiled and walked to the dashboard. He opened the hidden door and looked at the circuit inside. Find the toolbox. I'll give it a try. You can? Yes. Chu-ho's reply was concise and comprehensive. Ji-yu Jinglian and Lin Shi immediately split up to look for the toolbox. They finally found it in the cupboard. In the sky far away, the smoke of gunpowder gradually spread out, and the clamor of firearms gradually came to an end. 8,000 meters away from the coconut grove, a well-equipped, fully armed team was rapidly closing in on the signal tower. Max, lead the 7th Division and surround the signal tower in the north. Storm, you and the 9th Division will break through the encirclement with me. A man in a camouflage uniform was crawling in front of the broken wall. He was the leader of the entire team. The man turned around and ordered his men with a serious expression. He said solemnly, we just received news that a suspected government spy has sneaked into the war zone and is heading towards the signal tower. We have to surround them and eliminate the spy. A group of Special Forces soldiers holding Browning M2 machine guns nodded quietly. Soon, the lighthouse let out an alarm that resounded through the sky. Beams of signal beams crisscrossed and rotated in the sky. The man calmly waved his hand and said in a low voice, charge. Chapter 3552. The leader held his head high and led the elite division to the north of the lighthouse. At this moment, a sniper rifle shot rang out, and Max fell to the ground with a thud. His head had been accurately blown off. The bullet was too powerful and seemed to have been carefully modified. Poor DI, whose head was a bloody mess. It was too horrible to look at. The leader was stunned. However, in the next moment, a fireball whizzed towards the 7th Division like a meteor with a thick tail of smoke behind it. The leader of the division roared in grief and indignation. Following a loud explosion, miserable howls of pain could be heard. The Immerse rocket launcher had overturned the entire 7th Division, and an earth-shattering shockwave swept over them. Then, a cold voice echoed through the loudspeaker in the silent night. "I'm warning you. No matter whose unit you're from, retreat 5 miles away immediately. Otherwise, I won't show any mercy." The cold and arrogant voice reverberated in the ruins. The man looked around cautiously, but he could not see anyone. The voice said again, "Hey, I'm up there." The man looked up and saw Chu-Ho with her black hair dancing in the wind. She stood proudly at the top of the lighthouse with her arms crossed. Behind her, signal beams crisscrossed and overlapped. The strong wind lifted the coat tied around her waist. She looked valiant. Chu-Ho's expression was arrogant. Her slim figure was like a phantom from the Azura Palace, cold and heartless. She gently stroked the modified Barrett M99 sniper rifle in her arms. From time to time, she tilted her head and opened the scope to aim at the leader's head. She smiled eerily and said, "If you want to go to hell, I don't mind you taking one step closer." The man's expression changed. Panic flashed through his eyes. The group of special forces also panicked. They stood still and did not dare to act rashly. The leader raised the loudspeaker and said sternly, "Are you spies sent by the government? If you hand over the information in your hands now, we'll let you live immediately." Chu-Ho raised her eyebrows and said sarcastically, "Oh, looks like there's a misunderstanding. I'm not a spy. Those casualties in the battle zone, were they your doing?" "Yes," Chu-Ho admitted, "it was you rebels who wanted to kill me for no reason. I was just trying to protect myself." The leader's face turned cold and a chill ran down his spine. An army of more than 100 people had been completely annihilated by this seemingly weak woman. Who was she? "So many of our brothers have been killed by you. This blood debt must be paid." Chu-Ho sneered and said slowly, "Our people have also died in the hands of your soldiers. So many innocent civilians have suffered heavy casualties. If that's the case, then we're on good terms." Hearing this, the leader was so shocked that he took a deep breath, and his eyes widened in anger. Chu-Ho pointed at his head and snorted disdainfully. He casually sat down on the edge of the pagoda, his posture free and unrestrained. "I'm going to count down from 10 seconds. If you don't retreat, I can't guarantee what I'll do." 10. Chu-Ho was very beautiful. She was so beautiful that she was enchanting and breathtaking. The wind at the top of the pagoda was very strong. It messed up her hair, making it look especially messy. Chu-Ho held the loudspeaker and raised her eyebrows with a cold smile as she counted down, 9, 8. The man was so angry that he gritted his teeth and held his breath for a long time. Chapter 35:53. So many people have died in her hands. It seems that this woman is not simple. If we act rashly, so many people might die in her hands. 6, 5. As Chu-Ho counted, she held the sniper rifle in her hands even tighter. Her forehead was covered in cold sweat. "Give the order, Captain." The leader clenched his fists tightly. There was unwillingness and shame in his eyes. After hesitating for a few seconds, he gritted his teeth and said, "Retreat." In the team, a hoarse voice rang out, "Retreat. Retreat." The team immediately retreated until they were more than 1,000 meters away. Chu-Ho confirmed that the team had left through the sniper scope. She collapsed on the ground and leaned against the wall, trembling all over. This empty fort strategy had finally fooled these people. In fact, in the current situation, Chu-Ho and Jiyu Jinglian had no more ammunition on them. The RPG rocket launcher just now was their last weapon. It could be said that they had run out of ammunition all the way to the signal tower. As they left the battlefield, Chu-Ho could clearly feel that there were troops following behind them, chasing them all the way. However, they did not have any ammunition. In front of such a fully armed troop, they had lost all their strength. In ancient times, when the enemy was outnumbered, they lacked preparation. They deliberately showed that they did not have any troops, causing the illusion that there was an ambush and causing them to retreat in fear. In the era of the Three Kingdoms, Sima Yi's army approached the west side of the city. Zhuge Liang did not have any troops to resist, but he opened the city gate and played the zither on the city tower. Sima Yi suspected that there was an ambush, so he immediately retreated. This was the origin of the empty fort strategy. However, Chu Ho did not expect that at the last moment, she would use the empty fort strategy to scare off these soldiers. Just now, when they were counting down, she was more nervous than anyone else. She was worried that these people would not be deceived and would directly attack. They would be captured before they could even wait for help. Being captured was an ideal situation. If they were treated as spies and had their throats slit, then the three of them would really not be able to return. Jiyu Jinglian climbed to the top of the tower and saw Chu Ho leaning against the wall with a frightened look. He walked over, hugged her, and gently stroked her hair. He laughed and said, "So there are times when you are afraid of death." "I'm not afraid of death." Chu Ho clenched his fists. "I'm afraid that Xiao Bao will lose us." Jiyu Jinglian was stunned. He held her shoulders stiffly and comforted her gently. "It's okay. It's all in the past. Chu Ho, let's go home." "Yeah, let's go home. Xiao Bao is still waiting for us." Jiyu Jinglian curled his lips and smiled at her, only to find that Chu Ho's eyes were filled with tears. She was deeply touched. He kissed her once again. It was a kiss from the brink of death. It was short but warm. An FC-1 Valiant Dragon aircraft pierced through the clouds and arrived. Jiyu Jinglian carried Lin Shi and boarded the plane. Chu Ho clung onto the handrail of the cabin. The strands of hair in front of his forehead danced in the wind, occasionally pricking his eyelids, but it did not hurt or itch. She pursed her thin lips tightly and suddenly frowned as she looked back. The sky in the distance was gradually turning white. The beautiful sunrise that she had been looking forward to finally appeared in front of her eyes. 8,000 meters away, smoke rose in spirals above the coconut grove. That was the place where she and Jiyu Jinglian had fought their last battle. It was hard to imagine that the two of them, alone with a child, had actually fought their way out. Chapter 3554. Chuhi let out a sudden laugh and nimbly boarded the plane. Her back view was stiff and firm. 2 days later, the evacuation fleet docked at the harbor. Jiyu Jinglian and Chu Ho brought Lin Shi to line up and get ready to board the ship. When the fleet reached them, they were stopped. Who is this child? Because he did not have a passport, and because there were restrictions on the number of people who could evacuate, the fleet had to stop under fire. There was a limit to the capacity, and non-nationals were not allowed to board the ship. Lin Shi suddenly became nervous and pinched the corner of his shirt. How could he forget? He was born in North Africa. To be precise, he did not have a passport. But his father and mother did. Initially, his father and mother wanted to take him away from here. However, things happened later. His father and mother were no longer around, and he lost the right to board the ship. Lin Shi's face suddenly looked lonely. Chu Ho hugged him tightly and said to the person in charge of the embassy, "This is my son." "Your son?" "Yes. His father and I came to North Africa to do business. Our son was born in North Africa. During this war, we plan to bring our son back to develop his career." "Why, is there a problem?" Jiyu Jinglian said, "This is our son, Jiyu Lin Shi. He doesn't have a passport, but this is a special case. Please make an exception." Lin Shi was stunned. He looked up at Chu Ho and Jiyu Jinglian in disbelief. The warmth in his heart instantly overwhelmed him. "All right, let's board the ship." Jiyu Jinglian held the back of his head and said, "Lin Shi, aren't you going to thank Uncle?" "Thank you, Uncle." Lin Shi thanked him obediently, and the three of them finally boarded the ship. Generally speaking, because there were a lot of people in the evacuation fleet, many beds had to be empty. Usually, a bed that could fit one person was not allowed to sleep on it. Only 3 people were allowed to sit on it. This way, 3 people could be squeezed in. However, Chu Ho was too tired. The 3 of them were very tired, especially Lin Shi. After all, he was a child and his physical strength was limited. Somehow, Jiyu Jinglian managed to get the crew to arrange a single room for them. There were 2 beds in the room, and the 3 of them had to make do for a few nights. Returning to the capital from North Africa, they needed to dock at Victoria Harbour. On the ship, Jiyu Jinglian called Uncle Fu and informed him that the 3 of them had safely boarded the fleet to return to China. Uncle Fu cried tears of joy. "Master, where is Chu Ho?" "Chu Ho is fine. He's only slightly injured." "Is it serious?" "It's a little serious, but for now, we can only hold on until we return home." Uncle Fu was worried, but he was also happy. For the past few nights, he had been unable to sleep. He tossed and turned in bed because he was worried that Jiyu Jinglian and Chu Ho had met with an accident in North Africa. If something happened to Chu Ho while he was searching for Jiyu Jinglian, he would definitely blame himself to death. He didn't know how to explain this to Xiao Bao. He had been hiding this matter from Xiao Bao from the beginning to the end. However, now that Jiyu Jinglian and Chu Ho had returned safely, he had finally gotten rid of one of his worries. "Master, please take good care of Chu Ho. After all, she suffered a lot in order to find you. I don't need you to teach me. I will take good care of my woman. You don't need to worry about it." When Uncle Fu heard this, he still used Jiyu Jinglian's usual arrogant tone. However, he did not feel wronged at all. Instead, he felt gratified. Master finally knew how to take care of people. Chapter 35-55. By the time Jiyu Jinglian returned to the cabin, Chu Ho was already asleep. However, she had to sleep on her stomach to avoid touching the wound because of the injury on her back. Lin Shi gently covered himself with the blanket. Jiyu Jinglian sat on the bed. Seeing that Lin Shi was so sensible, he suddenly asked, "What do you plan to do after you return to China?" The teenager was stunned when he heard this. He did not speak. He did not have his parents, and he did not have a home. Even if he returned to China, he did not know where to go. Jiyu Jinglian saw his hesitant expression and asked, "How about being my son?" Lin Shi's eyes widened when he heard this. He was so embarrassed that he did not know what to do. You don't have to call me Dad. It's just that you don't have a home, so I can't just watch you be sent to the welfare home." Jiyu Jinglian continued, "After we return to China, I will go through the adoption procedures. I will adopt you, raise you, and provide for your education. How about that?" He sounded as if he was negotiating with him. It was obvious that he respected his opinion. However, Lin Shi was even more hesitant. "Is that okay? Won't it be too much trouble for you? I don't want to burden you." Lin Shi was very sensible. Naturally, he was worried that it would cause trouble for Jiyu Jinglian and Chu Ho. He had heard them casually mention that they already had a son. If they raised him, would it cause trouble? However, Jiyu Jinglian laughed. He had never mentioned his background to this child, and Lin Shi did not know much about the Jiyu family. Even if he raised 100 children, he would not feel any burden at all, let alone one. Jiyu Jinglian said, "Don't worry, as long as you are willing." Lin Shi nodded slowly and said, "Yes, I am willing. However, I will work hard in my studies. The money for my studies and living expenses will be a loan from you. When I grow up and have a job, I will return it to you." His childish words made Jiyu Jinglian laugh. He waved his hand and said, "Come here." Lin Shi walked over. Jiyu Jinglian held him in his arms and helped him lie down on the bed. He said, "Go to sleep." As he spoke, he covered him with the blanket. Lin Shi asked in surprise, "Uncle, aren't you going to sleep?" "I'm not tired." Lin Shi pursed his lips and did not force him to sleep. He was indeed so tired that he fell asleep as soon as he closed his eyes. Jiyu Jinglian's expression darkened as he looked at his sleeping face. However, he was conflicted about Gong Fan's matter. That child looked identical to the Mu family's Yun Tianyu. That was a long time ago. He heard that Mu Yaja had lost his beloved son in an accident. Although this matter was not made public, she was, after all, in the same circle as him. As far as he knew, the woman had yet to walk out of the trauma of losing Yuyu to this day. Jiyu Jinglian became even more suspicious. Of the Jiyu Jinglian leaned gently against the wall and closed his eyes to rest. After 3 days and 3 nights of drifting on the sea, they finally reached Victoria Harbour 4 days later. Uncle Fu and Xiao Bao were already waiting for them at the harbor early in the morning. Chapter 35:56. Chu Ho only felt a black shadow pouncing on her. It was only when Xiao Bao pounced into her arms that she realized that this black shadow was the little guy she had been thinking about day and night. "Mom, you're finally back. I missed you so much." Xiao Bao didn't know that Chu Ho was injured. When he pounced on her, it affected her wound. Chu Ho frowned in pain and endured it. Jiyu Jinglian suddenly grabbed Xiao Bao's ear and said fiercely, "Your mom is injured. Take it easy." He was still as simple and violent as before, not showing any mercy to his own son. Xiao Bao grimaced in pain and howled. However, when he heard Jiyu Jinglian say that Chu Ho was injured, he suddenly became nervous. "Mom is injured," Xiao Bao said and wanted to check. However, Chu Ho stopped him. She pressed his head and said, "It's okay. Just don't cause any more trouble. Just don't cause any more trouble. Just don't cause any more trouble." These words of indifference kept magnifying in his mind. Xiao Bao poked his fingers aggrievedly. He turned his head and suddenly saw Lin Shi in Jiyu Jinglian's arms. This unfamiliar boy who was a few years older than him was stunned. He was a little jealous. Dad had never hugged him like this before. As a result, Xiao Bao looked at Lin Shi with unconcealable hostility. Jiyu Jinglian put Lin Shi down. Lin Shi shrank behind Chu Ho uneasily. Chu Ho saw the hostility in Xiao Bao's eyes, so she said to Xiao Bao, "I want to discuss something with you." She squatted down with difficulty and pulled Lin Shi in front of Xiao Bao. She said, "His name is Lin Shi. From now on, he'll be your brother, okay?" "What do you mean?" "Mom went to North Africa to look for your dad and encountered danger on the way. It was this little brother who saved Mom. However, it's a pity." Chu Ho frowned and said, "Little brother's parents met with an accident in North Africa. After he returned to China, he was homeless, so Dad and Mom decided to adopt him." At first, Xiao Bao was still a little conflicted when he heard that he was going to adopt an unfamiliar child. However, after hearing that this young man had saved his mother and father, Xiao Bao's face suddenly became hesitant. No matter what, he was very grateful for saving his mother. But, Xiao Bao asked carefully, if Mom adopts him, will she not love Xiao Bao anymore? How could this be? Chu Ho rubbed his chubby little face and said reproachfully, "Xiao Bao, you're so stupid. Why would you think that? Think about it, Mom and Dad won't stop loving you. Instead, you'll have a little brother who loves you." Lin Shi also gathered his courage and said, I will definitely be a good brother." He was too nervous and wanted to perform well. Therefore, he was stuttering when he spoke. As Lin Shi spoke, he nervously extended his hand. His palm was wet with cold sweat. He had heard from Chu Ho that she had a 6-year-old child, so he desperately wanted to get Xiao Bao's acknowledgement. Xiao Bao looked at Lin Shi's outstretched hand, then looked at Jiyu Jinglian and Chu Ho. Finally, his gaze fell on Lin Shi's sincere face. Seeing that he was so nervous that his lips were trembling, he felt his heart ache for him. He did not hold Lin Shi's hand. Instead, he walked forward and hugged him gently, giving him a friendly hug. Chapter 35:57. He thanked him sincerely. At the same time, Xiao Bao smiled and said, "However, from now on, you're my older brother. As your younger brother, I'll take good care of you too." Lin Shi was a little surprised. He did not expect Xiao Bao to accept him as an outsider so easily, let alone say such heartwarming words like "I'll take good care of you too." However, to Xiao Bao, although Lin Shi was a stranger, he did not have the ability to do so. This little brother had saved his father and mother for him. This kind of life-saving grace was too precious. "You don't have a home anymore, so the Jiyu family is your home," Xiao Bao said. For some reason, Lin Shi, who was so stubborn that he refused to shed a single tear even in the face of such a ferocious rebel army, actually shed tears because of this sentence. After returning to the Jiyu family, Jiyu Jinglian immediately called for the doctor to check on Chu Ho's injuries. The wound was infected and inflamed. In such a harsh and complicated environment, even if the wound was properly bandaged, applied medicine, and disinfected, due to the fighting along the way, the originally bandaged wound showed signs of healing. However, Due to the violent movements, it was torn open, healed, and torn open again. This repeated over and over again, and in addition to the environment, it was inflamed. Fortunately, it was not too serious. It was just a little festering and pus. It was a pity that this place would be scarred. However, Chu-ho had so many injuries on his body that one more would not make a difference. There were several gunshot wounds on her body, and this was probably the lightest one. Ji-yu Jinglian had specially instructed Chu-ho to do a full body checkup. Chu-ho did a full body checkup. He remembered that during one of the explosions, the strong shockwave had directly flipped them over. Ji-yu Jinglian was not too far away from the impact, but Chu-ho was sent flying back to the tree trunk. He did not know if his tendons and bones were injured. The doctor touched his tendons and bones. After asking, Chu-ho also said that he did not feel any injuries. Hence, at least his tendons and bones were not injured. Ji-yu Jinglian was relieved. Xiao Bao did not know what was going on. Only after Uncle Fu explained again and again did he understand. It turned out that his father was stuck in North Africa because of work. His mother was worried and rushed to North Africa. The two met on the way and returned together. Fortunately, both of them were fine. However, Ji-yu Jinglian knew very well that if it weren't for Chu-ho's tacit cooperation, he probably wouldn't have been able to get out of North Africa in a short time. And this was the most optimistic scenario. With Chu-ho's injuries, he probably wouldn't be able to get out of bed for at least half a month. She applied the medicine and lay down. The doctor examined Lin Shi and Ji-yu Jinglian again. Ji-yu Jinglian only suffered some superficial injuries. In the end, it was nothing more than a dislocated ankle, but he reconnected it himself. The doctor repositioned it for him. Other than that, he was fine. Lin Shi suffered more injuries, but most of them were superficial wounds and not too serious. The trip to North Africa was a thrilling one. Fortunately, they were safe. However, during the half a month that Chu-ho was bedridden, Uncle Fu discovered something very strange. His master actually knew how to take care of someone. During the half a month that Chu-ho was bedridden, it was difficult for her to move around. She could not sit up very well. Occasionally, she would turn around and need someone to carry her. Chapter 3558. Now that he was bent on recuperating, he could not be too reckless. He had to be careful in everything he did to avoid affecting his wound. Uncle Fu originally wanted to hire a nurse, but Ji-yu Jinglian rejected it. When he asked for the reason, he refused to say anything. It was only when he passed by the room in the middle of the night that Uncle Fu saw Ji-yu Jinglian turning over with Chu-ho in his arms through the crack in the door that he suddenly understood. It turned out that the old master was worried that the nurse would be clumsy and wanted to take care of him personally. Ji-yu Jinglian usually did not do any chores. Other than work and the Ji-yu group's matters, he was like a shopkeeper who did not care about anything else. Not to mention taking care of an injured person, he would not even know how to wash the dishes. He did not do any chores and had never served anyone like this before. However, in the past half a month when Chu-ho was bedridden, Ji-yu Jinglian had been taking care of him. Chu-ho was also very surprised. She did not expect that Ji-yu Jinglian seemed to have changed a lot after returning from North Africa. Even when facing her, Ji-yu Jinglian still had his usual arrogant and cold face. However, he would accede to her every request. He even tried to wash her face and peel an apple himself. The scary thing was that when it came to taking care of people, he could not do anything else except peel an apple. He actually used a military knife to peel it, and the skin did not even break. How valiant. It was also an eye-opener for her. Ji-yu Jinglian asked Uncle Fu to investigate a matter. Uncle Fu thought that it was something important, but he did not expect Ji-yu Jinglian to ask him to investigate Mu Yaja's son, Yun Tianyu. Master, why are you suddenly asking about this child? Why? This child, Uncle Fu sighed as he spoke. This child is Yun Shusha's sore spot. Dead? Yes. Do you have a photo of Yun Tianyu? Uncle Fu shook his head when he heard this. But I have a photo of Mu Ichen. Mu Yaja's eldest son? Yes. He and Yun Tianyu are twins, and they look exactly the same. Master, I'm a little curious. Why are you suddenly asking about this child? Because, Jiyu Jinglian said faintly, I met him in North Africa. Who? Uncle Fu hesitated for a moment before his expression changed. Could it be Yun Tianyu? Gong Fan. Gong Fan? You should know about the Hurricane Group. Jiyu Jinglian paused for a moment before continuing. It was Hurricane Group that took over Wyatt. I saw a child who looked exactly like Yun Tianyu in North Africa, but his name isn't Tianyu. His name is Gong Fan. This, Uncle Fu was also speechless. He felt very strange. Yun Tianyu was indeed no longer around. Even after so long, Mu Yaja and Yun Shusha still could not walk out of the shadow. Yun Shusha, in particular, was still very upset. Yun Tianyu's name could not be mentioned at all. It was Yun Shusha's biggest pain in her heart. Uncle Fu asked hesitantly, Master, are you sure? A dead person can't be brought back to life. Are you sure you're not mistaken? Jiyu Jinglian was also a little hesitant. He was also a little skeptical. Do you think there are two people who look exactly the same in this world? Chapter 3559. Jiyu Jinglian furrowed his brows. But what? Uncle Fu said, it's just that it's impossible to say that they look like they're made from the same mold. Even if they're twins, they look different. Jiyu Jinglian furrowed his brows slightly but did not say anything. Forget it. There's no need to get involved in the Mu family's matters. This is their family matter. Uncle Fu sized him up and suddenly said carefully, Old Master, ever since you came back from North Africa, I've noticed that you've changed a lot. How have I changed? You've become gentler. Uncle Fu smiled and observed his expression as he said, When I passed by Chu Ho's room earlier, I saw you taking care of her so attentively. This is the first time I've noticed that you know how to take care of. Before he could finish his sentence, Uncle Fu saw the obvious displeasure on Jiyu Jinglian's face and immediately corrected himself awkwardly. Take care of. Jiyu Jinglian's expression softened a little. Uncle Fu then continued, Old Master would never lower himself to take care of someone in the past. This time, I feel that Old Master and Chu Ho's relationship has improved a lot. Why else would they say that a friend in need is a friend indeed? After all, he had gone through a life-and-death situation. Compared to the tit-for-tat between the two of them, it was indeed different. Jiyu Jinglian gave him a cold sidelong glance. You talk too much. Fu Bo tactfully shut his mouth and didn't say anything. He knew that Old Master was shy. Jiyu Jinglian stood up and said expressionlessly, She's injured, so it's inconvenient for her. I'll just... His expression was a little unnatural. It was obvious that he felt a little uncomfortable. It's only right for me to take care of her. Uncle Fu cursed silently in his heart. What a prideful guy. Chu Ho woke up and lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling in a daze. When he had just returned to the Jiyu family, he had a high fever due to his wound being infected. It was only until last night that he recovered some of his vitality. Jiyu Jinglian suddenly pushed the door open and walked in. Chu Ho heard the footsteps and looked up. When he saw that it was Jiyu Jinglian, he lay back on the bed like a corpse. Hungry? Jiyu Jinglian asked. Chu Ho shook his head. I don't have any appetite. He had been on anti-inflammatory drugs for the past few days and was about to vomit. He had no appetite at all. I want to eat something sour. Sour? Jiyu Jinglian's first reaction was, You're pregnant. Chu Ho, seeing that she did not speak, Jiyu Jinglian's expression suddenly became unnatural. Really? He remembered that he had met her once before. What does eating sour food have to do with pregnancy? It's not like only pregnant women want to eat sour food. Chu Ho paused and said, Don't worry, I took birth control pills last time. Jiyu Jinglian did not react at first, until he suddenly realized what birth control pills were. He came back to his senses, but his eyes instantly darkened. Birth control pills? From his tone, he sounded a little unhappy. Chu-hee did not notice it and hummed in acknowledgement. Why did you take this pill? Of course I have to take it. It's a critical period. Chu-ho said again, it's so troublesome to be pregnant. Jiyu Jinglian's expression gradually darkened when he heard this. She said that being pregnant was troublesome. She actually felt that being pregnant with his child was a troublesome matter. Jiyu Jinglian's eyes suddenly turned cold. Chapter 3560. What's wrong with you? Why do you look like that? Jiyu Jinglian's expression became even gloomier when she asked that question. This stupid woman actually dared to ask him why he looked like that. This kind of medicine can't be taken casually. His words made Chu Ho even angrier. How dare you say that? If it weren't for you. Chu Ho paused at this point. His face was strangely red and he couldn't continue. If he hadn't acted like a beast that night, she wouldn't have needed to take this kind of medicine. Everyone knew that taking morning after pills was bad for a woman's health. For a period of time, her menstrual cycle was messed up. However, fortunately, her physical fitness was good. She didn't need to take care of herself and slowly recovered. Jiyu Jinglian said coldly, "You don't have to take it. What if I'm pregnant?" Jiyu Jinglian said, "If I'm pregnant, I'll give birth to it." He replied almost at lightning speed. Chu Ho didn't react for a moment and was stunned. When he came back to his senses and repeated his words, Chu Ho was furious. A man is a man. It's easy to say that if I'm pregnant, I'll give birth to it. Jiyu Jinglian, don't you know how painful it is for a woman to give birth? Moreover, if the child is born, who will be responsible for raising it? The Jiyu family is so big. Can't we raise a child? In other words, even if she gave birth to a bunch of babies like a sow, Jiyu Jinglian could raise them with his eyes closed. Chu Ho's mind flashed with the image of her protecting a bunch of piglets like a sow. He shuddered. It was so scary. Chu Ho said coldly, "If I give birth, are you going to be responsible for breastfeeding, keeping watch at night, and changing diapers?" Jiyu Jinglian stopped talking. Chu Ho snorted coldly. "So, you don't have to be responsible for what you say. When the child is born, you won't be the one to suffer. I'll take responsibility," Jiyu Jinglian said out of the blue. Chu Ho was stunned. "What did you say?" Jiyu Jinglian repeated patiently, "I'll be responsible." Chu Ho felt so awkward that he couldn't say anything. However, from his tone, it was clear that he was serious. This man would never make promises easily, nor would he be like other men, who would use flowery words. However, he would definitely do what he said and never go back on his words. Jiyu Jinglian walked to the door and stopped Uncle Fu. He instructed him before returning to her bedside to sit down. 10 minutes later, Uncle Fu sent someone to buy a few jars of dark plums. Jiyu Jinglian took the jars, opened the lids, picked up a plum with a fork, and brought it to her lips. "Eat." It was a harsh sentence, as if he was forcing her to eat it. Chu Ho unhappily took a bite and put it into his mouth. Actually, she didn't particularly like sour food. However, she had been lying in bed with an 4 drip for the past few days. As a result, her mouth felt bitter and astringent. In addition, the nutritious meals that Uncle Fu had prepared for her were rather bland, so there was no taste in her mouth. Hence, she wanted to eat sour food just to stimulate her taste buds. The sweet and sour dark plum kept secreting saliva in her mouth. It was so sour that Chu Ho kept blinking her eyes. Jiyu Jinglian also picked up a dark plum and put it into his mouth. It was so sour that he frowned. However, after the intense sourness, it was sweet. It was very sweet. Chu Ho spat out the seed and opened her mouth again, indicating for him to feed her another dark plum. Chapter 3561. Xiao Bao was taking an afternoon nap in his room when he suddenly received a call from Lin Shi. He picked up the phone, only to hear Lin Shi mumbling pitifully, "Little treasure. Where are you now?" "I'm in my room." "Well," Lin Shi said bitterly, "I think I'm lost." Xiao Bao blinked and said speechlessly, "Okay, where are you?" Lin Shi had been lost in the Jiyu residence for 5 days. The huge Jiyu residence was no different from a maze to him. How big was the Jiyu residence? Let's put it this way. His parents worked in a factory in North Africa, and the Jiyu residence was as big as the factory. However, he would never get lost in the factory, not only because he grew up there, but also because the roads in the factory were wide and there weren't many twists and turns. The Jiyu residence had dozens of courtyards in the front yard and backyard. These courtyards were connected by all sorts of winding corridors. It was no different from a maze. This wasn't the first time he got lost. Fortunately, Jiyu Jinglian had given him a cell phone. When he got lost, he could call Xiao Bao and Uncle Fu for help. Lin Shi said over the phone, I don't know where I am, but I see a rockery and a big pond. There are so many rockery and ponds. I don't know which place you're talking about. There's an ancestral hall here. There seems to be a lot of memorial tablets inside. Ancestral hall. Xiao Bao thought about it carefully and remembered that he had been there twice when the Jiyu family worshipped their ancestors, so he knew the way. Wait for me at the entrance of the ancestral hall. I'll go find you right away. After hanging up, Xiao Bao jumped out of bed, rubbed his eyes, and ran downstairs. After passing through several courtyards, Xiao Bao finally found the ancestral hall. He saw Lin Shi standing at the entrance, looking a little embarrassed. Xiao Bao walked over and complained, Lin Shi, why are you here? You've been here for a few days, but you still don't know the way? Lin Shi said awkwardly, your house is so big. I get lost every time. The main thing is, I don't remember the way, so I can't tell the direction. Xiao Bao glared at him reproachfully. Lin Shi thought that he had said something wrong and looked at him uneasily. Xiao Bao said, what do you mean by my home? Lin Shi, this is your home too. When Lin Shi heard this, she realized that he was unhappy about this. Her heart warmed and she held his hand. All right. This is our home. I was wrong. Don't be angry. Xiao Bao smiled. Let's go. The two children walked hand in hand to the courtyard, but they heard a commotion not far away. It's the Gong family. Quickly go and inform the master. Then, Xiao Bao and Lin Shi saw Uncle Fu rushing to the main building. He was in such a hurry that he didn't even look at Xiao Bao. Xiao Bao looked at the entrance strangely. He saw that among the group of people, only a silver-haired man stood out. He had an imposing aura and was about the same height as Jiyu Jinglian. He wore a snow-white military-style trench coat and a pair of white combat boots. Every inch of his handsome face was exquisite and impeccable. Xiao Bao's eyes widened. This man was cool and handsome. Chapter 3562. Hearing this, the man turned around and nodded slightly. He instructed a few of his men to stand guard outside the door and said coldly, wait for me at the door. With that said, he followed Uncle Fu to the guest room. When he passed by Xiao Bao and Lin Shi, the man looked straight ahead without looking back. His footsteps were like the wind, messing up Xiao Bao's bangs. Lin Shi was a little intimidated by his aura and asked fearfully, who is this man? Xiao Bao shook his head in confusion. I don't know either. In the guest room, Uncle Fu brewed a pot of Da Hong Pao tea and poured 2 cups of tea for Jiyu Jinglian and Gong Jie. Young Master Jie, what brings you here? Gong Jie took a sip and put the tea aside. He didn't exchange too many pleasantries and went straight to the point. I heard that you just returned from North Africa a while ago. Although his voice was low, he couldn't hide his aura. Hearing this, Jiyu Jinglian said mildly, yes. I heard about it too. Gong Jie looked at him. The Jiyu Industries factory in North Africa, Werther, has been bought over by Hurricane along with the land. Since Hurricane bought it over, young Master Jie should know about it. Hearing this, Gong Jie's eyes darkened. Is this true? Jiyu Jinglian snorted coldly. Even in front of Gong Jie, it was hard to quell the anger in his heart. After all, he had been reluctant to give up that piece of land in Werther. At that time, he was on par with Hurricane. If Gong Fan hadn't been so despicable and ruthless, he wouldn't have taken the initiative to withdraw from the North African market. Jiyu Jinglian thought that Gong Jie knew about it and still came to the Jiyu household so brazenly to show off. Thus, his tone was very impolite. Young Master Jie, you don't have to pretend. After buying that piece of land, Hurricane Group is already the overlord of North Africa. Since that's the case, why did young Master Jie come to me and pretend to be polite? Don't tell me that you don't know about this. Gong Jie was wrongly accused. Gong Jie said honestly, I didn't know about this. To be precise, I didn't participate in the discussion. I even objected to the acquisition. He knew very well that monopolizing a market meant that he would obtain unprecedented benefits. However, this also meant that there would be no healthy competition. If it was not run properly, the market would be irredeemably rotten. There were wars in this world because of competition. Humans were also humans, and their survival was built on competition. Without competition, it would be regressing instead. It was no different from the closed-door countries of the Qing dynasty. When he was in charge of Hurricane, he had always considered a positive balance and did not oppress the other forces too much. Although his methods were also ruthless, compared to Gongfan, they were not as terrifying and aggressive. However, if the pressure was too much, it would mean that there would be resistance. This was not something that he was happy to see, therefore, he was not the one who initiated the acquisition. What made him even more dissatisfied was that no one in Hurricane knew about this. This matter was decided by Gongfan directly. He did not discuss it with anyone, not even Gong Shaoying. However, this was not the main point. The main point was that child. Gong Jie asked in a low voice, "You went to North Africa and saw Gongfan?" Gongfan? Jiyu Jinglian did not evade the topic. "I saw him." "You saw him?" Gong Jie stood up excitedly. "You really saw that child?" Jiyu Jinglian raised his eyebrows. "Why? What's with that child that made young Master Jie so excited?" Chapter 3563. Have you seen his true appearance? Gong Jie asked again. When Jiyu Jinglian heard this, he picked up his teacup and casually picked up the lid. After taking a sip, he said calmly, "Yes, I did." "What does he look like?" "I've only seen him once. I can't remember what he looks like." Jiyu Jinglian said truthfully, "Because that child has always been wearing a cloak and a big hat. He has never shown his true appearance to anyone." Gong Jie heard this. Indeed. He had seen Gongfan once, but from a distance, he saw his back view as he boarded the ship. It was so familiar, but he could not see his face. He only saw that he was wearing a wide fur coat, like a big cloak, and a hat, so he could not see his true appearance. In fact, not to mention outsiders, even the people in the group had not seen his true appearance. It was said that those who had seen his true appearance had been shot to death on the spot. This was Gong Shaoying's order. Therefore, Gong Jie had always been very suspicious. What was the reason for protecting a child to the point that even if someone saw his face, they would immediately make this person disappear from this world? How unpresentable was he? He could not help but be a little suspicious. "You really don't remember?" Jiyu Jinglian said coldly, "I don't know how to draw portraits, and I can't describe him roughly. But if you take out a photo to compare, I might be able to recognize him." The reason why he was so calm and composed was because of the man's not-too-tough stance. The Hurricane Group and the Jiyu family were not at odds with each other. It was just that such a thing had happened. The Hurricane Group had violated Jiyu Jinglian's interests. It would be hypocritical to say that he did not bear a grudge. Jiyu Jinglian was very vengeful, and Gong Jie was an arrogant master. He had never taken the Jiyu family seriously. However, such an arrogant man did not have as high a stance in front of Jiyu Jinglian as before in order to inquire about the child's whereabouts. This meant that the child was very important. And Jiyu Jinglian was the only person who had seen the child and was still alive. To put it bluntly, he was the only lead. When Gong Jie heard this, he immediately took out a pocket watch from his chest and opened it. There was a picture embedded in the pocket watch. He walked over and handed the pocket watch to Jiyu Jinglian. He asked, "Take a look. Is this the child?" Jiyu Jinglian took the pocket watch. In the photo, there was an innocent child smiling at the camera. He squinted his eyes and smiled at the camera, looking pure and cute. Yun Tianyu. Indeed, he looked exactly like that child. Gongfan was Yun Tianyu. The more he thought about it, the more terrifying it was. Jiyu Jinglian's lips curled into a smile. "Didn't I hear that the child disappeared in an accident? It's rumored that he's already dead." Gong Jie clenched his fists. "We can't come to this conclusion without seeing the corpse." "Yes. If he's alive, we can't find him. If he's dead, we can't find his corpse. It's hard to say whether he's dead or not." Jiyu Jinglian closed the pocket watch and threw it back to Gong Jie. He asked coldly, "What if I say that the child might not be dead?" Gong Jie was stunned when he heard this. "You mean, young Master Jie is looking for me because everyone who has seen the child is dead, including my subordinates?" They all died in the child's hands. Even if it was not Gongfan's order, these people's lives were still his. He continued, however, the Hurricane Group didn't have any disputes with the Jiyu family in the past, but it does now. The Hurricane Group has caused such a huge loss to the Jiyu family. How should we settle this debt? Chapter 3564. I don't care about the value of that piece of land. The problem is, why did that child buy that piece of land? Young Master Jie should know what he's doing. Gong Jie was silent for a long time before he returned to his seat and smiled. Young Master Jiyu is just worried that Hurricane will use that piece of land for experiments. When the time comes, they'll become the overlord in the future and threaten the Jiyu family's land. The world is bustling, and I come for benefits. The world is bustling, and I come for benefits. Young Master Jie should understand such a simple logic. Jiyu Jinglian had made it so clear. If Gong Jie still did not understand, then his title as Hurricane's chief commander was just an empty title. In other words, Jiyu Jinglian was implying that the Jiyu family's losses were small, but if Hurricane grew too big in the future, it would be lonely at the top. It would not be beneficial for Hurricane and the Jiyu family. Similarly, he also deliberately revealed that the child he saw in North Africa might be Yun Tianyu. However, Gong Jie still wanted a definite answer. He said, Hurricane will definitely compensate the Jiyu family for their losses. However, before that, you have to give me a definite answer. Is that child called Gongfan really Yun Tianyu? I don't know. Jiyu Jinglian continued, no one dares to say such a thing, but the child I saw in North Africa has the same face as the child in the photo you showed me in your pocket watch. Upon hearing this, Gong Jie was so agitated that his whole body trembled. It's Yo-Yo. The legendary son of Ghosts of Hurricane Group, that mysterious young man, is really Yo-Yo, who went missing in that accident. Gong Jie clenched his fists, not knowing if this was a good or bad news. If it's Yo-Yo, why doesn't he know how to go home? Does he not want home, daddy, mommy, and brothers and sisters? If it's not Yo-Yo, why do the two children have the same face? Jiyu Jinglian continued, based on his appearance, the child is about 9 years old. 9 years old. Gong Jie grasped another piece of information. 9 years old. When Yo-Yo went missing, she was 8 years old. It had been more than a year since she went missing. Everything seemed to match. He didn't believe in such a great coincidence. Hence, he firmly believed that the mysterious youth called Gongfan must be Yo-Yo. Gong Jie came to another conclusion. For the past year, Gong Shaoying had been hiding Yo-Yo in Hurricane, and no one knew about it. Why is Yo-Yo in his hands? What did he do to Yo-Yo this time? Yo-Yo, who had been missing for a year, had turned into Gongfan. Why had he become so ruthless? Gong Jie could not figure this out no matter how hard he tried. But one day, he was almost 100% sure. Yo-Yo was Gongfan. Gongfan was Yo-Yo. When he found out, Gong Jie was extremely excited. For the past year, he had not stopped looking for Yo-Yo. However, he had not found him or his corpse. Yun Shusha missed her son too much and was depressed. If it weren't for Xiao Chen and Yu Yarrow, she might not have been able to walk out of this trauma. Gong Jie stood up and said to Jiyu Jinglian, Young Master Jiyu, sorry to disturb you. He turned around and left in a hurry. Jiyu Jinglian watched Gong Jie's back coldly. He gently blew on the surface of his tea and took a sip. In the past, if the Gong family came looking for him and asked about this matter, Jiyu Jinglian would have treated it as if it had nothing to do with him and would have kept quiet. However, things were different now. Chapter 3565. Perhaps it was because she was worried and put herself in his shoes that her heart softened a little. Jiyu Jinglian put down his teacup, slowly stood up, and walked upstairs. When Gong Jie heard the news, he did not immediately look for Gong Shaoying. Since his father had deliberately hidden Yo-Yo, named him Gongfan, and isolated him from the world, it meant that his father had other intentions. If he found his father, Gong Shaoying might not admit it. Instead, he would be even more guarded. As such, it might be even more difficult to find Yo-Yo. The most strange thing was that if Gongfan was really Yo-Yo, why would he be loyal to Gong Shaoying and not want to come home? Even if Yo-Yo did not have the ability to leave Gong Shaoying, given Yo-Yo's personality, he would not be so loyal to Gong Shaoying. Moreover, all along, Yo-Yo had done things that went against the original intention of the Heavenly Eye Plan. Back then, Yo-Yo proposed the Heavenly Eye Plan to control the war by controlling the information technology in the sky to suppress the war. Gong Shaoying did not agree with this idea. But now, Gong Fan was going to sow discord, and create a war. His Heavenly Eye Plan was made purely for killing. This was not Yo-Yo. This was a demon. If he was really Yo-Yo, how did he become like this? Gong Jie was heartbroken, but he could not think of a reason. He did not tell Yun Shusha about this immediately. After all, before this matter was confirmed, he did not want her to be shocked and have too much hope. If something happened then, he was worried that she would not be able to accept it. Back then, when she walked out of the shadow of this matter, he saw how much pain his sister was in. Therefore, Gong Jie left the Jiyu family and went to the Shengyu Financial Group first. Mu Yaja was in the company. Gong Jie found his office, went in, and got straight to the point. Mu Yaja had just finished a meeting. Jiang Shen and Lu Jinyu were also in the office. Jiang Shen was a little surprised to see Gong Jie in such a hurry. "What's wrong? I have something to discuss with you." "What is it?" "Yo-Yo might still be alive." The man furrowed his brows when he heard that. "I know. However, we still haven't found his whereabouts." He had never given up on searching for Yo-Yo's whereabouts. Even though searching for a child was undoubtedly like searching for a needle in a haystack, and the cost of searching for a person every day was very high, no one was willing to give up. "That's exactly what I'm here to discuss with you," said the man. He sat down on the sofa, casually picked up the cup, and drank the tea in one gulp. At the side, Jiang Shen saw that Gong Jie was holding his teacup. He frowned and raised his hand, wanting to say something but hesitated. However, due to Gong Jie's abuse of power, he did not dare to say it out loud. He heard that this brother-in-law of his had a serious case of misophobia. He was afraid that he would be beaten to death by Gong Jie if he said anything. "I might have found out Yo-Yo's whereabouts." Mu Yaja heard this and reacted for a few seconds. He stood up abruptly. "What did you say?" "Gong Fan." Gong Jie said a name. "A few days ago, there was a war in North Africa. The Jiyu family's Werther was acquired by hurricane. I remember mentioning this to you." "Okay." Mu Yaja asked again, "What's the connection between these two matters?" Chapter 3566. My father said that this child was left behind by him. But from what I know, it's not possible that this child is my father's direct descendant. "So, you suspect that it's Yo-Yo?" "Yes, that's my initial suspicion." Gong Jie analyzed further. "Coincidentally, I heard that after Yo-Yo went missing, this child was with the Gong family. It's said that my father arranged for him to recuperate on a private island. This means that this child's health isn't good either. These characteristics are consistent with Yo-Yo's. I heard all of this from others." Mu Yaja asked again, "Do you have any concrete evidence?" Jiang Shen and Lu Jinyu listened quietly from the side, unable to express any opinions. Gong Jie continued, "Jiyu Jinglian just returned from North Africa. He's the only person who has seen that child and is still alive." "What do you mean?" "The Gong family has ordered that anyone who has seen the child's face is dead. This means that my father has protected him very well. Hence, no one knows what he looks like or who he is." As Gong Jie spoke, he frowned and said, "Some time ago, Hurricane acquired Wayet. I heard that it was a forced acquisition. Logically speaking, given Jiyu Jinglian's character, he would never give up that piece of land. I'm guessing that Gong Fan must have used something to threaten him and forced him to sign the agreement. As for why he didn't kill him, I don't know either." "Are you sure?" "It's precisely because I'm not sure that I didn't tell Shusha about this immediately. I'm worried that if that child isn't Yo-Yo, it'll be another disappointment." Mu Yaja nodded as well. "We have some leads on this matter. Let's keep it from him for the time being." "Wait." Gong Jie suddenly stood up. Suddenly, he thought of something and his expression became serious. Mu Yaja saw that he looked nervous and didn't say anything. He was worried that he would disturb his thoughts. He must have found some useful clues again. Gong Jie turned around abruptly and glared at him. He suddenly said, "Lisa." "Alice." "What?" "I remember that there was a long period of time when Alice wasn't at the headquarters. After Yo-Yo went missing, there was no news of her at the headquarters. I don't know where she went. If Yo-Yo was really brought back to the Gong family by father, then he must have been injured. Plus, his body needs to be nursed back to health, so he must need someone with great medical skills to look after him at all times. Alice is a doctor." "Yes, she's a medical prodigy from Hurricane." "Who is Lisa?" "She used to work for me, but I sent her to Yo-Yo to be Yo-Yo's personal bodyguard. I haven't seen her in a long time." Mu Yaja said, "If we find Alice and Lisa, we might be able to get some clues. I can't find any traces of Lisa, but Alice is in Hurricane now. If I go back and ask her, I might be able to get some information." Mu Yaja nodded. Gong Jie left the capital. He took a private jet and rushed back to Hurricane's headquarters overnight. Gong Shaoying wasn't on the island. He found Alice. When he saw her, she was researching medicine in the laboratory. Alice was surprised to see him back. "Why are you back?" Gong Jie smiled and said, "I wanted to have a drink with you." "Why, are you busy?" Chapter 3567. In the pub. When Gong Jie took out the red wine that he had kept for many years, Alice could not help but feel flattered. "I see that you've been hiding these wines well. Why are you willing to take them out to drink now?" Gong Jie smiled and filled her glass. Alice smiled and took a sip from the wine glass. Her mouth was filled with its mellow fragrance. "You didn't come back in such a hurry just to have a drink with me, did you?" Alice teased. "Don't tell me you came back because you missed me." Gong Jie was used to her teasing, but now, he was not in the mood to chat with her. He said bluntly, "I came back to ask you something." "Okay, go ahead. I'll answer whatever you ask." As Alice spoke, she sipped the rim of her glass and sized him up. Gong Jie went straight to the point. "Some time ago, you disappeared for a long time. No one knows where you went." Alice's hand that was holding the wine glass suddenly paused as her gaze froze. Gong Jie looked into her eyes seriously and said word by word, "You would never leave the headquarters for no reason. There must be something special, and you had to hide this from everyone. Where did you go?" Alice did not speak. "You can't say?" Gong Jie narrowed his eyes and asked again, "Then let me ask you another question. Gong Fan, who is this child?" Alice's fingers that were holding the wine glass stiffened. Gong Jie observed the change in her expression and her stiff knuckles and understood what was going on. Alice asked, "Gong Fan? Why are you suddenly asking about him? No one in Hurricane knows about this child's background. You know. Alice, you know that the mouth can lie, but the eyes can't." Gong Jie said expressionlessly, "At this point, are you still trying to hide it from me? If I wasn't confident, I wouldn't have come looking for you. Since I've found you, I'm 90% sure that Gong Fan is Yun Tianyu. Am I right?" Alice suddenly stopped talking. She said with a pale face, "I don't know anything. Do you really not know anything, or is it because father told you to keep it a secret?" Alice was speechless. Her feelings told her that she could not lie to Gong Jie. However, her rationality reminded her that she had to keep this a secret. However, he also felt heartache. For Yo-Yo, and at the same time, for Gong Jie. Alice put down her wine cup and suddenly said, "Gong Jie, as a friend, can I remind you to persuade your sister to return to the Gong family and acknowledge her father? Blood is thicker than water and is connected by blood. How can a biological daughter not acknowledge her father?" Gong Jie narrowed his eyes, his expression a little gloomy. "Alice, are you implying that father hid Yo-Yo as a punishment for sister?" Alice looked away in a panic. "I didn't say that." Gong Jie suddenly grabbed her chin and forced her to look at him. "Alice, look into my eyes." Alice looked up at him. Gong Jie said word by word, "Alice, if you lie to me in the slightest, you'll regret it. Gong Jie, do you know that we've been looking for Yo-Yo like crazy?" Chapter 3568. Alice hurriedly said, "Gong Jie, calm down." "How can I calm down?" Gong Jie retorted angrily. "If you tell me that because my sister didn't acknowledge him, because of this matter, you hid Yo-Yo by your side as a punishment, that's simply unreasonable. Things aren't what you think. Alice also stood up and said agitatedly, there's no punishment or targeting. It's just that. Gong Jie stared at her. Alice, you've never been a mother before. You don't know what the pain of losing a child means. Alice stared at Gong Jie with her mouth agape. Suddenly, she felt a sharp pain in her heart. She clenched her fists and suddenly said self-deprecatingly, I'm afraid I won't have the chance to be a mother in this lifetime. However, that doesn't mean that I can't understand how it feels to be a mother. Gong Jie was also stunned. He knew that his unintentional words had hurt her. Alice was infertile. Before she came to Hurricane, she was an ordinary doctor. In order to research a vaccine, she did not hesitate to use herself as an experimental subject. She did not expect that the experiment would fail and the virus would backfire. She was infected with the virus and was finally out of danger after a few days and nights of emergency treatment. Because of this, she was expelled from the hospital. Because of the virus, she was infertile for the rest of her life. This almost became a thorn in her heart. I'm sorry. It's okay. It has nothing to do with you. She must have thought of the fact that she was infertile. Gong Jie did not mean that in his words. Gong Jie sighed. Forget it. Since you don't want to say it, then forget it. He was about to leave when Alice suddenly spoke. I'm curious. How did you suspect that Gong Fan is Yun Tianyu? Gong Jie paused in his steps and turned around with a smile. Direct and accurate. Combining the clues, Gong Fan's identity was indeed very suspicious. Alice said, sit. Hearing this, Gong Jie did not say much and just sat down on a chair. Just as he sat down, Alice suddenly asked curiously, don't you suspect that Gong Fan is Yun Tianyu? Why didn't he go back and look for you guys? I still can't explain this matter to this day. Could it be amnesia? Alice smiled and picked up the goblet. She drank the wine in the goblet in one gulp and finally decided to be frank. Perhaps, it was the man's words that had finally touched her. The pain of losing a child, as a woman herself, she could not bear to see her flesh and blood being separated from her. Alice said, Yo-Yo didn't lose her memory. Hearing this, Gong Jie raised his head abruptly and glared at her. So, you admit that Gong Fan is Yun Tianyu? Yes. Alice nodded frankly. Gong Jie, you're so smart. You already have the answer in your heart. You asked me because you trust me. After so many years of friendship, I can't let you down. Gong Jie did not know whether to be happy or worried when he heard this. He was happy that Yo-Yo was still alive. What Alice said must be true. No matter what, it was a blessing in disguise that he was still alive. However, he was worried that Yo-Yo had become like this, which made him extremely heartbroken. Just the fact that he had accepted the name Gong Fan was puzzling. He has already forgotten about you. Chapter 3569. What? Gong Jie widened his eyes in disbelief. That's impossible. It's fine if he forgot about me, but how could he forget about his beloved mommy? Could it be that his brain? There's nothing wrong with his brain. The so-called memory loss is not what you think it is. Alice's expression was calm, but there was a hint of guilt in her eyes. Gong Jie did not say anything. He looked at her, waiting for her to tell him everything. Alice took a deep breath and said honestly, I hypnotized him. Hypnotized? Do you know about deep hypnosis? Gong Jie was so shocked that he was speechless. He suddenly remembered that when a person wanted to leave the Hurricane group, they would use deep hypnosis to erase all memories related to the Hurricane group. On one hand, this was to protect the interests of the Hurricane group. On the other hand, the memories related to the Hurricane group were too dark. If the person wanted to leave the group and return to a normal life, these memories would be a burden. Hence, deep hypnosis could erase a lot of memories. Such hypnosis had always been carried out secretly by Alice. Gong Jie had always known about hypnosis, but he did not know that the person who carried it out was Alice. So, you hypnotized him? Yes. How did you hypnotize him? Gong Jie asked agitatedly, can the erased memories come back? Yes, but it's very difficult. Not only were Yo-Yo's memories erased, but his first personality also disappeared. Personality? You didn't know that Yo-Yo has two personalities? I didn't know. Alice explained, he has two personalities. One is the most innocent side, like a piece of white paper, spotless. The other is the dark side, evil, like a demon. Gong Jie was stunned. So, you erased his first personality and he became like this? You can say that. Alice analyzed Yo-Yo's personality for Gong Jie. Yo-Yo's childhood was spent in happiness and darkness. The happiness was that even though he grew up in a single-parent family, Yun Shusha gave him a lot of love and companionship. However, the darkness was that Yun Na and Li Qin's insults and scoldings gave birth to the hatred in his heart. The two personalities existed independently and did not interfere with each other. Back then, when Yo-Yo dealt with Yun Na and Li Qin, the first personality did not know about it. He only vaguely knew that he seemed to have done something earth-shattering. One was innocent, the other. One was an angel, the other was a demon. Back then, when she sealed Yo-Yo's memories, her first personality was also destroyed by her second personality along with the memories. The memories, but the personality. Even if the memories were recovered, the first personality would not come back. After Yo-Yo became Gong Fan, he was completely dark. He was ruthless, black-bellied, and would do anything to achieve his goals. However, Yun Shusha was still the white moonlight in his heart. However, even Yun Shusha would not be able to awaken his first personality. There was no such thing as reviving a destroyed personality. Chapter 3570. You should be apologetic. If I didn't mention this matter, how long were you planning to hide it from me? Alice said weakly, this was your father's request. As his subordinate, I had no choice but to carry it out and keep it a secret. Now that I've told you this secret, I've already broken the rules. Gong Jie clenched his fists and trembled in anger. Why did he do that? He really could not understand. What was the meaning of Gong Shaoying doing this? He intends to use Yo-Yo to deal with Shengyu. Deal with Shengyu? Gong Jie's eyes were filled with shock. He knew that his father hated Mu Yaja to the core, but he did not expect him to be so cruel as to use an innocent child to deal with Shengyu. When the time comes, when Yo-Yo deals with Shengyu, he'll use this as a threat to make Yun Shusha return to the Gong family. Doesn't he think that he's being cruel? Jie. Alice said calmly, do you think that with your father's status, he's in a high position and no one has ever dared to go against his words? In his mind, there are no rules about right or wrong. In his mind, he doesn't care who's right or wrong. No one can stop him from getting what he wants. He loves Yo-Yo, but in his mind, he doesn't think that it's a mistake for his grandson to return to the Gong family. However, if he doesn't use this method, he won't be able to keep anyone. Whether it's Yun Shusha or Yun Tianyu, he feels lonely, but other than power, he has no other means to get his daughter back. When love reached the depths, in a certain aspect, this love would change its form and flavor. Gong Shaoying was wrong, but Alice understood. Gong Shaoying was hateful, but he was also pitiful. Yo-Yo is the most pitiful one, Gong Jie said. He didn't have any choice and had his memory cruelly erased by you. Do you know who is the most important person in his life? Alice didn't make a sound. His mother. Gong Jie continued, he regarded Shusha as more important than his own life. Erasing his memory is even more cruel than killing him. Alice was so shocked that she almost suffocated. Indeed, ever since Yo-Yo's memory was erased, he had become a completely different person. He was a true devil. If Shusha saw this, she would be very sad. Gong Jie didn't even know how to mention it to him. I want to see him. Gong Jie suddenly said, let me see him. You can't see him. Your father protected him very well because he was worried that you would bring him back. Still, even without Gong Shaoying's interference, the current Yuyu may not be willing to leave with you if you want to take him away. Gong Jie smiled. I know. Then, so, if I borrow you, maybe you can see him. Alice was stunned. She immediately understood what Gong Jie was referring to. I've been investigating your recent whereabouts. You disappear for a period of time in the middle of every month. I'm guessing that you must have gone to the island during this period. Alice did not say a word. Gong Jie held her hand tightly. Bring me to him, Alice. Chapter 3571. She looked up and said calmly, okay, I'll take you there. However, you need to be prepared. At least, when you board the ship, you can't reveal that you're the crown prince of the Gong family. There were still more than 10 days until the middle of the month. Gong Jie and Mu Yaja had a video call over the ocean. When Gong Jie found out about this, he said that he had confirmed that Mu Yaja was Yo-Yo and that Alice would bring him to see him in the middle of the month. Mu Yaja expressed that he wanted to go too. Gong Jie laughed. Brother-in-law, don't joke around. You're the most dangerous person in Hurricane. You can't even get on the ship. Mu Yaja raised his eyebrows. Okay, it's fine if I don't go. However, if Xiao Chen goes, it shouldn't be a problem. Gong Jie immediately understood what Mu Yaja meant. He frowned and thought about it carefully. I understand your plan. Okay, then I'll send Xiao Chen to your place 3 days in advance. Okay. After ending the video call, Mu Yaja stood up from the desk. After hesitating for a long time, he finally decided to mention this matter to Yun Shusha. Yun Shusha was reading a script in the bedroom. Mu Yaja pushed the door open, gently knocked on the door, and walked into the room. When she heard the sound, she looked up. When she saw him walking in with a serious expression, she became very nervous. What happened? Mu Yaja sat on the side of the bed silently. He crossed his legs elegantly and said in a deep voice, "There's something I want to tell you. However, you have to stay calm. Don't be nervous and don't get agitated, okay?" Yun Shusha laughed. Why are you so serious? What's the matter? Don't worry, I won't get agitated. Mu Yaja smiled and stroked her hair gently. Yo-Yo, just the name that escaped from his thin lips made her face turn ghastly pale. Ever since Yo-Yo went missing, this name had become an unspeakable pain in her heart. At the mention of this name, Yun Shusha's heart ached. Why did you mention him? Yo-Yo is not dead yet. Yun Shusha couldn't react for a moment. It was only after she had a hard time separating the 5 words from each other and repeatedly comprehending them that she was stunned and suffocated. He's not dead. Yun Shusha immediately sat up and stared at Mu Yaja in disbelief. Is this true? Don't lie to me. It wasn't easy for her to pull herself out of despair. Now, she couldn't take a second blow. Mu Yaja's lips curled into a smile. Do you think I'll joke about this? Shou Jie was the one who told me that Yo-Yo is not dead. He's not dead. Then where is he? At the Gong residence. Yun Shusha's expression froze at once. He was hidden by your father. He changed his name and disappeared without a trace. It's impossible. Yun Shusha smiled weakly. Could you be mistaken? Yo-Yo is at the Gong residence, but it's been so long. Why hasn't he returned home? He was hypnotized and lost all his memories. He even forgot his own name. Mu Yaja continued, he also forgot about you, forgot about me, forgot about Xiao Chen, forgot about Yu Yao. Yun Shusha gasped and shook her head in disbelief. I don't believe it. How could he have lost his memories? This was something that only appeared in movies, but it actually happened to her. It was unbelievable. Chapter 3572. Listen, Shusha. I'm just letting you know about this, but you have to stay calm. Don't think too much. Leave this to me. I can handle it. But, Mu Yaja held her shoulders and asked seriously, do you trust me? Yun Shusha looked into his eyes and was silent for a long time. Then, she suddenly said, of course. You're my husband. How can I not trust you? She hugged him tightly. She didn't know whether to be happy or worried about this news. Her eyes were a little red. She was happy that Yo-Yo was still alive. As long as he was still alive, it was a blessing in disguise. However, she was worried that she didn't know when Yo-Yo would be able to come home. Yun Shusha walked into the baby's room. Yu Yaro was lying in the crib, fast asleep. There was a small nightlight above the crib. It was soft but not glaring. It shone on Yu Yao's tender little face, which was as tender as white jade. Yu Yaro would be 2 years old in a few months' time. She wondered if Yo-Yo would be able to come home on that day. Yun Shusha looked at Yu Yao's neck. There was a necklace around her neck. It was made by Xiao Chen. During the accident, Xiao Chen had been holding tightly onto the 2 purple crystals that Yo-Yo had given him. He made 2 necklaces. One was for himself, and the other was for Yueyao's neck as a memento. After Yo-Yo's accident, Xiao Ichen had matured overnight. He had transformed from his childish self into a mature big brother. Xiao Ichen dreamed of Yo-Yo. Yo-Yo said to him, "When I'm not around, you have to take good care of Mommy and Yu Yao." He had always engraved these words in his heart. Xiao Ichen believed that Yo-Yo was definitely still alive. The telepathy between the Gemini twins told him that Yo-Yo wasn't dead, but he didn't know where he was. However, his ability was limited. He didn't know how to search, but he never gave up. Yun Shusha smiled. "Yu Yao, I remember that the first word you learned to say was brother. You really want Yo-Yo to come back, don't you?" Yu Yao's eyes were tightly shut, but her pink lips were slightly curled up. She was clearly having a sweet dream. Xiao Ichen stood at the door but did not enter. Instead, he quietly leaned against the door and looked at his mother, who was squatting by the crib and talking to Yu Yao with a gentle expression. He smiled. Mu Yaja had already told him about this. When he found out that Yo-Yo was still alive, he was both surprised and not surprised at the same time. His daddy said that Gong Jie would bring him to see Yo-Yo in the middle of the next month. At the same time, he also gave him a very important task. Gong Jie would think of a way to bring Yo-Yo back. Xiao Ichen would stay on the island as Gong Fan and replace Gong Fan for the time being. Xiao Ichen gladly agreed. Even if he was trapped on the island, he still had a way to come back. However, he was more worried. If Yo-Yo was brought back, would he be able to regain his memory? Xiao Ichen wasn't sure about Yo-Yo's current situation. He also didn't know if his so-called memory loss could be recovered. He only hoped that his uncle would bring Yo-Yo back to the Mu family. At least, Yun Shusha could wake him up and help him regain his memory. "Mommy," Xiao Ichen called her softly. Yun Shusha turned around and saw him standing at the door. She immediately wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes. "You're not asleep yet?" "Yes, I was passing by and saw that the door was open."